EC representation in Latvia, Andris Kužnieks. Thank you, Martins. Good morning, everyone. Very happy to welcome you, especially given the solid turnout, and we are entering a new cohesion policy planning period, so congratulations on that. And I do suppose that you can already read from the agenda that the European semester and the cohesion policy go hand in hand, are inextricably linked. Over the previous periods, especially last period, we focused on reforms and the implementation of the EU funds. Of course, this will still be a focus for the next programming period, and as Martin already mentioned, the semester report or the country reports that have been issued to all the member states provide a EC vision regarding the preferred investments in case of each member state. Of course, we will also come with our national development plans, our vision, and will present it to the European Commission. And I do hope that everyone will be able to plan everything in advance in order to avoid any disruptions or interruptions. Of course, we are very much dependent on the political process, but we are not going to touch upon those today. Nevertheless, I think it is very important to make sure that everyone is prepared for the next programming or for the new programming period, and that we can all ensure that there is no interruption and we can quickly switch over to the next programming period, absorb the funds and distribute the funds to those beneficiaries who need the funding. This is where I'd like to put a stop. Would like to wish you constructive discussion today during today's workshop, and would like to turn the floor now over for introductory remarks to Normans Porpants. And thank you for coming, by the way. Thank you, Andris, and I would like to thank the EC representation in Latvia for hosting the event. Would like to thank the Latvian government bodies and agencies and various organizations who'd accepted the invitation to attend the event. I'm very happy after a brief while to come back to return to Latvia. I'm walking in the shoes of the European Commission, or I'm here wearing a hat of the European Commission, and I'm going to talk about the issues that are beyond my competence, because I'm working mostly with regional and urban policies and structural funds and urban development and structural funds. Nevertheless, in my introduction, I would like to briefly explain to you why the planning of the structural funds goes hand in hand or is very closely linked to the European semester cycles. In the beginning of the presentation from my colleagues from DG ECFIN and DG Employ, you will hear about this bond or this link, and then afterwards with the colleagues from the DG Employ, we are going to cover the planning issues. Now that I have given you the introduction in the Latvian, in order to show you that my Latvian is still good, I would like to now switch over to English, if you allow me, because my colleagues will then find it easier to continue talking about what I'll start talking about. And the terminology is so complex that I don't know the right terms in Latvian, unfortunately, but I hope that you will forgive me for not knowing those terms in Latvian.
Sure, because it's a language that we use also within the Commission when we work together, and I think it will be then a bit easier for my colleagues also to get into the right mood, because I wanted to explain to you in my opening remarks why are we together, the European Structural Funds planning and the European semester process, because it's not just what Andris said, that it was a notion that reforms should go before we actually release EU funding into our member states and regions. We introduced a very big reform already in the current period for the implementation of structural funds. And the link with the European semester process and country-specific recommendations was already quite important and quite visible when we negotiated the planning of current program in Latvia. But it is also true that when we invest, the funding itself, it doesn't mean everything. It means a lot, but it doesn't work if you don't have the right conditions put in place. And when we talk about conditions, it's not just, these key enabling conditions for future or ex-ante conditionalities for current period, which are field-specific legislation which sets the right rules in place, but it's also, generally more speaking, the needed reforms in our member states and regions. And this is very much linked to the structural weaknesses and also sometimes the structural strengths, but it has to be looked together with the planning of funds. It's only logic for the European Commission that we are together and that we have produced the investment annex D in this context. Because for us, all the EU instruments should be able to support what we as a Commission, together with the Member State, of course, agree as the necessary reforms that need to be done. So, looking at countries like Latvia, we can say, well, but everything is great because the economic development is there, the growth is there, the unemployment is decreasing, so the country looks nice, you know, everything looks great, but there are certain weaknesses that still need to be addressed. And there are certain reforms that are absolutely important to be done. Not everything which you will read in the staff working document, which, as Andres said, we have published already on the 27th of February. You read not everything which needs to be done as part of our view, because the European semester is a very deep process within the Commission. All the Directorates General, including ours and employment, and of course led by DG ECFIN, we put together our expertise and we really try to help the country to identify what are these key weaknesses or structural weaknesses and key reforms that we need to pursue together, and we try to also give some concrete suggestions what needs to be done. And then, of course, we look at the funds and we see where the funds also can provide funding, but also through key enabling conditions in future set the right condition for the future investment to come. Because if you look, for example, at fields like health, education and labour market, where reforms in Latvia still are needed, it's not a priori our investment which will, you know, help everything. No, it's the actual will on the ground, the ownership, the political will, but also the agreement between different actors in these fields, how to finalize these reforms. And then the investment will follow, because we are ready to invest in many fields on the condition that there is a clarity on where are we going, and that the hospital we finance tomorrow will not be destroyed 3 years afterwards. And the same is for schools and for other social infrastructure. And I'm talking here mostly about ERDF, obviously, but my ESF colleague will explain, I'm sure, more about other measures in these fields. Everything has to be part of a strategy, part of the future, and part of sustainable growth, because we know that people will work if they are well educated, if they have access to basic services. We have analyzed in our work in the recent years why in Europe there are certain regions which are fallen into this middle income trap, we call it, but those are regions where we invest but nothing happens. They don't decrease their welfare, but they don't increase, they stagnate. And then we also looked at the very, very poor regions, and Latvia, unfortunately, somehow still qualifies for the less developed region in Europe. It's hard to believe when you are in Riga, but okay, we know that there is also countryside, there are regional disparities in Latvia which need to be addressed. So we've looked at what are the reasons behind this non-development or stagnation, and we have to say that mostly it's not about access to funding. Yes, it could be some problems in particular crisis periods. There could be some gaps in terms of infrastructure here and there. By the way, I was driving this horrible road from Vilnius to Riga yesterday. It's a shame, two capitals linked by something which is horrible. I'm not saying from funds we need to do it. I'm sure the EU Invest or some other instruments, Connecting Europe facility, can improve the Via Baltica corridor. I think it's Via Baltica now. But it was a horrible feeling for me, because I thought we have invested so much in roads, and one of the success stories is 300 kilometers in Latvia renovated. I would really like to see where. So hopefully I will use my few days before the Easter holidays to find those 300 kilometers in Latvia. I'm very ironic here, but it's very important because there's a lot of money that was used for funds, not for Vilnius-Riga road, obviously, but it's something which can be a very important gap. That's what I'm trying to say. Infrastructure, of course, needs to be developed, and it's not just roads. We are talking about not just transport and mobility, it's also digital infrastructure, broadband, energy infrastructure, connections. We all know how we were disconnected from Europe and how bad and poor energy infrastructure is in the Baltics still. So all this needs to be addressed, but this is not the key for development, unfortunately. The key is people. The key is reform of the labor market. It is educational system which needs to develop necessary skills which can then be employed. And it is also, I think, for us as Europeans, social inclusion and really developing the economy, which includes everybody. And this is why talking about these main principles or key values of European Union, which are enshrined in the Charter of Basic Rights, but then also specified in other parts of our legislation, it's very important to go ahead, you know, with tough reforms, but in a socially acceptable way, respecting social inclusion and basic human rights. And this is my message here today. This is why I think being together with European semester is the right thing for the development of our program, because I hope we will have this one program in Latvia which combines all the funds together, and we can continue investing in Latvia for the sustainable growth and jobs in a socially inclusive way. But wherever the reform needs to be finished, we have to look at the staff working document. We have to see what can be done to improve also the conditions, both through reform and investment. And I was talking about health, education, but basically we are talking about business environment, about having the good transport master plan, having a smart specialization strategy which makes sense for investing into innovation and small and medium-sized enterprise development. All that together would create a beautiful investment package also for future for Latvia, because the funding will be available. Yes, it's less than in previous periods, it's inevitable, but because of certain circumstances. But I think we must be optimistic, and I would like to invite you for constructive dialogue. Yes, please tell me and my colleagues where you think the Commission might not be totally right or where we can improve, but we need to work together, because only this cooperation and work together will lead to something which we all want, is better life for our people everywhere in Europe, including Latvia. So thank you so much for listening to me. I hope I've set the right tone for my colleagues on DG ECFIN and DG Employment. They will continue with presentations. I will discreetly disappear, you know, from the spotlight because, you know, I will come back. We will have a press briefing, but in the afternoon with my colleagues from Region and Empel we will be fully available. So if you have questions purely linked to fund implementation, save them for the afternoon. And here you are, Mr. Heinz Janssen and Muriel Gwyn.
Yeah, but that's not an issue.
So I will. Yeah. So liels paldies.
So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll go and do something else for a bit, but I'll return for the press briefing, and we'll spend the afternoon session talking about the fund. So good luck to you.
Thank you, Normans. It is very worth listening to him. He is among the top 3 officials in the EC, and I think that he will also be able to come to Riga from Vilnius, also via Rail Baltica. And maybe he could also be using the tech of a bypass, which will help to access Riga faster. Thank you, Normans. And now I would like to give the floor to the head of the Department of the European Commission Directorate General for Economic and Financial Affairs, to Heinz Janssen. He will talk about the country report for Latvia, which was published by the EC at the end of February. He will talk about the rationale behind it. Normans already mentioned some things about it, but he will also talk about the common logic about productivity, the labor market, economic trends, and how this all combines together. We have talked to many of you about this report with the trade unions, at the parliament, and this is the continuation of the negotiations of our conversations. And this is a very good beginning, because in the second part of the day we will be going into greater detail also with regard to planning.
I think I stand up to the benefit of those in the back rows. Not that I'm that good looking, but it may be a bit more convenient for you. This bit has been largely mentioned already. I mean, the report came out on the 27th of February, and this is actually the 7th edition of this, and I see it's still popular. So the innovation that we had, which was already mentioned, is that we now have a bit better link with cohesion policies and linking the different aspects of the Commission. I mean, the later part, discussing cohesion funding and so forth, that's for after the lunch break. Here I will only report on, together with Muriel, on the classical country report. To motivate what we are doing, Latvia is currently in good economic times. I mean, we have very rapid growth of a good nearly 5% in the last 2 years. It started out as an investment recovery and has become more broad-based. It's currently driven by consumption mainly, and also investment. We expect that to slow down a bit because we have double-digit investment growth rates that will not stay that way. Trade is not doing as well as we hoped, but by and large we are in good economic times. It has already been mentioned that the labor market is doing fine. Notably, the share of population at work is higher than it ever was. This is not to show you that we can do forecasts, but it's also to show you that this is now a very good time to implement reforms. Latvia, over the years, has been pretty good at doing what we and others asked them to do. This year did not bring that much in terms of reforms because you had government formation that was a bit difficult. So, but if you want to do something, now is the time. This is basically the history of economic history of Latvia in one chart. You had before the economic crisis, you have enormously high growth rates, and then after the boom, it collapsed, and you bounced back. But what happened is that you never really got back to the old growth rates. And it's now for us, I mean, to motivate that there are 3 big trends that the country has to deal with. One is catching up. The easy things of growing faster than the rest of the EU has been done. I mean, the low-hanging fruits, or whatever jargon we use, where you just have a bit more capital and you imitate others, that's been done. Now the country needs to move more into quality products if it wants to continue catching up. The second big trend is the demographic changes. Demographic changes that just means many things. That means scarcity of labor. I mean, you cannot put more people to work if you don't have more people. It means that you deal with the costs of aging. It also means that you have to maintain the infrastructure and social services with fewer people is becoming difficult. The third aspect is that while you had very good growth, not everybody benefited equally. and you have an income distribution problem. My bit of the presentation will deal mostly with the first part, and Muriel will then say something about the second bits. To catch up, we need to have productivity growth. But it's not just in order to catch up, but we also have another phenomenon where Latvia stands out from the rest of the EU. You have the fastest growth in labor costs anywhere in Europe. I mean, we can argue a bit about the numbers, but so far that has not cost you much in terms of competitiveness in the export section and so forth. We are also not so much worried about a replay of the crisis of 2009, 10, etc., where you had this enormous build-up of a bubble which then burst. What we are looking at currently is more that you slowly price yourself out of the market, that you might lose competitiveness that way. One way to keep wage growth going is, of course, then it boils back to the same story. You need to raise productivity. Currently, you have wage increases of like 7%. You cannot maintain that in the long run unless you do something. Here, this chart then shows again in a bit more detail the productivity story. Again, you see it used to be very high, collapsed, and it went to a lower level. You are still catching up, but you also find yourself only at something like 67% of productivity of the EU. I mean, phrase it differently, each per hour worked, you would have to increase your productivity by 50% to reach the EU average, but by the time you reach them, they will have moved on. So it will take quite a bit for you to catch up there. That, as I said, needs to, it cannot be just based on imitating others, and it cannot just be based on increasing capital. I mean, all that helps, but you need to move what we call, you move up the quality ladder. You need to move into products where you compete on quality rather than price. There are pockets where that happens. In the IT sector, exports, services exports, that's fine, but it needs to be more broad-based. So what I will do now is look a bit at the conditions of where government comes in to create the conditions for what might help with productivity, starting with fiscal policy. Fiscal policy over the years is by comparison relatively solid. I mean, debt levels are at 40%. In terms of the debt sustainability, we do not see a major problem. What we criticize a bit is that in the short term, the country acts counter-cyclically. That means we are now in good times. We have a positive output gap, and that basically is that means that you're in a boom. And in a boom, to have an expansionary fiscal policy is not a good idea, because you don't have the reserves to be expansionary when it's needed. We have here on the chart, it reports on the structural balance. I mean, the structural balance is something that's technically complicated to calculate, but it basically means that we look at what the deficit would have been if you had normal times, if you do not benefit from low unemployment and so forth. So it takes the nominal balance and corrects for that. And there you can see on the purple line that it was expansionary exactly when you went into a boom. So the report mentions then things that you should have a better policy in terms of having expenditure limits in the budget. That is, but fiscal policy, of course, is not just surpluses and deficits. It's also what you do with the money. Latvia stands out with having a very, very small government share. It's actually, I believe, the smallest in the EU. And if you have a small government share, you need to spend less money on something. In the case of Latvia, you see here in the chart, I'm not sure if you can still hear me when I'm walking that way, the total government share is a good 8% lower than in the rest of the EU. And then we looked at in which fields you're actually spending less. And healthcare and social spending stand out. That's why you have a lower government share. And the consequences Muriel will talk about. The report also criticizes, in a sense, why, or mentions where, if you want to increase spending on social and things in healthcare, you need to collect the money somewhere. Tax compliance is low in this country. There, something can be done there. Also, the property tax is underused, and you haven't updated the cadastral values for that. So there's a problem there. So we would recommend some action there. Moving on to banking. The banking sector, by and large, is solid. That means if you look at the standard ratios that one looks at when we compare countries, like profitability, coverage ratios, and so forth, there Latvia is doing fine. You're a little bit higher than the average on these something called the non-performing loans, but by and large, we do not see a major problem. The major problem, in a sense, is something that could have been, or in the past was a strength. The sector is dominated by Nordic banks. That means you have access to the Swedish and Nordic markets. We had in the past written about a risk of contagion from these markets. But what we had in mind was that maybe the Swedish housing market might take a hit, and then the Swedes would pull their money back. Now we have a bit of a different story, and that is the money laundering issue. And there it is not just Latvia, but it's also that the whole complex of Baltic countries combined with Nordic banking looks to the outside investors a bit toxic right now. You have not only the Danske scandal in Estonia, but you also had now Swedbank admitting that they channeled 135 billion through Estonia without telling anybody. And there you have the risk that investors will simply look at Nordics plus Baltics and ask their banks to pull out of it. And there is, it may not be fair to the Baltics because Latvia has done a bit. Estonia is also doing a bit, but your country is just too small for the outside world to really look at the subtle differences of what Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are doing. They simply say, stay out of it. You see here, in terms of what the country has done, is that you see the ABLV downfall. That basically here you have the light blue one. That's the non-resident loans because of new regulation that basically bans shell companies from having deposits there. That basically went down by 2/3 within a year. So something is going on, but in order to stay away from the risk of contagion from other countries, from the Nordics, you need to be more, or the country needs to be more than diligent and doing more than what they need to formally do to implement all these anti-money laundering directives. Looking at investment, you see the customary pattern that we now have. It went really high up, and then it bounced down, and then slightly back up again. But in terms of takeaways from this chart is, one is it never went back up to the old levels. The second one is, if you compare what happened in Latvia to the other countries, to the EU and even the newish member states in the EU, Latvia is much, much more volatile than the other countries. The third thing to look at is that private investment actually is not higher than in the EU. If you look at the thick yellow line, compare that with the blue-yellow line, what is a bit higher is public investment, and there the structural funds play a major role. Now, why is investment, in particular in the private sector, not much higher? I mean, the report identifies three issues. One is building procedures seem to be rather tedious in this country, combined with a very strict rent control. The second bit is that the shadow economy constrains credit growth. If you do something in the dark, your bank will not lend you money for that. Yeah? And that is, I could have brought that in the banking sector, but that's one aspect. The third one is R&D. Investment is, of course, one thing. I mean, you have wonderful shopping malls here, but they may not really help with the productivity of the country. If you look at quality, R&D is the important bit. And here you do not have many large companies that really can do R&D, and we recommend that the state-owned enterprises step in there and do some more. Also, I mean, in terms of research, Latvia is a small country, but research is rather fragmented. So there's a bit more to be gained from pooling resources, and also what is an aspect is having research is one thing, but you need to also do the step to innovation, to implementation of these things. So I mean, in that juncture, also we recommend working on it. That gets me to structural sectoral policies. It's a bit of a mixed basket that I put on this slide. If you're wondering what DC is, I had to look that up a while ago. Also, that's the Digital Economy and Society Index. What it does is, I mean, we picked that out because, I mean, IT in many ways is the future. You're doing well in some of these aspects. I mean, in terms of connectivity and where the government uses IT, you're doing better than the rest of the EU. But on the private side, there is a lack of IT skills that can be improved on. The second aspect is that Latvia might have many trees, but it's not a green country in the environmentalist sense. I mean, you have a lot of low energy efficiency in terms of many other targets like recycling rates. You may have, I don't think you even have half of what the EU average is. Then things like eco-innovation. I mean, there are lots of areas where things can happen. Finally, also on the governance side, I mean, you have a fragmented regional administration. I hear there's some action going on now. I do not know how far that will go. And corruption risk in procurement, that is basically the fact that at least 1/3 of public tenders, they only have one bidder. And the recent Riga transport case may serve as a reminder that there is something to be had. Finally, some of it will be dealt with in the afternoon. We, of course, as a Commission, encourage the completion of the European transport networks. Rail Baltica was already described by Norman, so I will not go into that. I'm getting to my final slide that is basically says that if you look at averages, that is one part of the story, but there are quite a number of regional, quite large regional differences here in this country. One can always argue about the index if one compares Latgale with Riga. I mean, the GDP per capita is 1/3 of what it is in Riga. These numbers are higher than what I guess they are in real life, because they exclude commuting and that sort of thing. But still, even if you're correct for that, I mean, they're 40% or so poorer. Now, what happens over the last 10 years, since 2010, is in terms of wage growth and GDP per capita growth, Riga doesn't stand out that much. But what you see here is, if you look at the first one, Riga is roughly growing by 1.5% in employment, while the others are falling. So the wage differences are not increasing, but the regions are in some ways bleeding out. And I mean, there is something that needs to be done or should be done in order that the disparities between areas do not increase, because it is costly in terms of you need to build the roads, you need to maintain the infrastructure. And that basically gets me to the end of my presentation, from regional inequalities to social inequalities, I guess. And pass on to the other.
Thank you, Heinz. Before starting, just a tip to pronounce my family name. You know the famous French painter from the beginning of 20th century, Paul Gauguin. So you take out the go and you keep the gain. So indeed, now I switch to employment and social issues, and of course I will put more into detail some of the findings that Heinz already described. There are mixed findings about employment and social issues. We are a bit more critical on the social part. So the rule of the game, of course, of today is that we are going to underline a bit more the issues where we think that there are urgent actions. But I will start indeed with the positive things which matter, which are related to the labor market, where, as Heinz was saying, it continues to perform quite well because, of course, of strong economic growth. And the employment rate has really increased. It reached 77.3%. In 2018, and the activity rate has also increased. The employment rate has decreased, so there are quite good things happening. What is important, and it's a difference, of course, compared to certain other member states, is as youth employment has continued to improve. And the share of young people not in employment, education and training has also decreased, and it has come now close to the EU average. So at the same time, despite these good results, we have demographic trends that make more and more difficult to increase the number of people in employment. You are very well aware that labor shortages start to be an issue across various sectors, even if the main problem are in the sectors requiring the STEM, in particular in the information, communications and technology. And of course, this lack of adequately skilled workforce is a problem when it comes to doing business, and it limits the prospects for gains in productivity, which is one of the main issues introduced by Heinz at the beginning. And as we were saying at the end of Heinz's presentation, the regional disparities are also important for the employment opportunities, and internal mobility remains a challenge. There is uneven regional distribution of jobs and vacancies, which result with high employment in Riga, while in other regions you have things falling behind. And what we see is that the lack of affordable housing and social housing is also a bottleneck for internal mobility. So gaps in employment based on skills persist as well. The employment gap between persons with high and medium education attainment is amongst the highest in the EU. Then you have more than 40% of ethnic minorities over 55 years old that have knowledge of the Latvian language and or where the proficiency is low. And at the same time, the participation in adult learning is low, especially for the population over 55. Another thing that we see is that tripartite social dialogue is well established, but there are still issues of capacity for social partners to participate and contribute to different processes, legislative processes, but other, bipartite, and so on, because of the low membership rates and lack of financial and human resources. And why does it matter? Because social dialogue at EU level, but also for each of the member states, is really important for finding some solutions on discussing on wages and competitiveness, working conditions, health and safety, the quality of employment, working time, skills issues, work-based learning solutions, the way to face technology changes, digitalization, new forms of work. All of this, really, social dialogue can play an important role. On social issues, you know that we are working in the country report now also with a compass, which is the European Pillar of Social Rights, approved by different partners, institutions, but also member states, social partners. And for this, we have developed a social scoreboard where we have a series of indicators. On the basis of the European Pillar of Social Rights, we have started to develop EU instruments. You know that we've made some progress on work-life balance with a directive which sets new rights on parental or carers' leaves. We have a directive that has been approved on more transparent and predictable working conditions. And we also have an agreement on the creation of the European Labour Authority, for which, by the way, Latvia is a candidate, I understand, for the seat. So maybe let's have a quick look at some of the indicators. Well, first, you have a green indicator, which is actually your Rebecca Koha indicator. It's your gold medal. She lifted 220 kilograms, but you, as Latvia, you have managed to have 2 points better than the EU for this. So congratulations. Then you have a blue one, which is also okay. And then I will come gradually to the different ones. But as you can see, you have three critical indicators, which are on income inequalities, the impact of social transfers, on poverty reduction, and on health issues. So, on poverty, the main idea is that poverty risk for the elderly is rising. The first finding is that the low social spending leads to low adequacy and limited impact of social protection. Your spending on social exclusion benefits is only 0.1 of GDP, while the EU average is 0.5. Your housing benefits is also quite small. So the social transfers in 2008 reduced the risk of poverty by 19% in Latvia, whereas the EU average is 33%. So you see the huge gap in the impact, and the impact on inequality was only 19%, and it's also among the lowest in the EU, which is an average of 40%. Among this area, of course, the guaranteed minimum income is an important issue for the Commission. This is something that we have online for the past several country reports. There was a slight increase last year, but this benefits is only around 15% of the current at-risk of poverty threshold. Now, the reform on the minimum income support targets low-income households and can address some parts of the poverty inequality. But however, there are much delays, and the implementation is uncertain. So we guess that it's going to be also an issue of discussion in the next weeks and months for you. And the people at risk are mainly the elderly, the unemployed, and the persons with disabilities. There are some improvement of the situation for some part of the population, the working age population and children, also because you have made significant increase in child care benefits. But there are a series of benefits that have not been at all increased since 2006. For example, the minimum pension, no change since 2006. And also the state social security benefit, which served as a basis for calculating the invalidity pension, has not been revised since 2006. So there are issues, as we said, of housing deprivation, so which affects particularly low-income groups. And this is particularly high in Latvia. The social housing is also scarce, and very often it's not fit for living. And homelessness as a policy has not been addressed at national level up to now. Healthcare, flashing red on the social scoreboard. I mean, we acknowledge, of course, that there was an increase in 2018 in the financing. That was in particular to tackle the remuneration of medical staff, accessibility of health services, and also the availability of innovative medicine. And it has resulted in reducing some waiting times and also the availability of some services. We know that some further increase of financing is envisaged in 2019. But despite this, the public financing for health in Latvia is really very low. It's only 2.6 of the GDP in 2018, whereas the EU average is 7.4 with the data of 2016. And you are very aware of what it means for the people. It means lowest life expectancies among EU countries. It means that preventable and amenable mortality levels are also among the highest in the EU. And you have risk behavior very high with obesity rates and also alcohol consumption, which are still a major and cause of concerns. So there are some reforms, and we, with my colleagues from DG Regio, so with ERDF and with ESF, we support also some financing, but they're still at an early stage of implementation. We see really a need of acceleration of some parts. We see that the reform on the hospital sector is progressing, but we believe that it's important also that equally there are some progress in the primary care part of the reform, and that further cooperation between hospitals and between hospitals and primary care is further developed. So, of course, accessibility to healthcare is also a concern, where you saw that the unmet needs was really high, and there is, of course, an issue of cost, in particular for the low-income earners. We had raised some questions about the reform of the two baskets of health services between the minimum and the full baskets. We pointed to the risk that linking the entitlement of the full baskets to payment of social contributions or to voluntary payments may lead to increasing inequality in access, whereas it's already a very high inequality in that regard, especially for some parts of the population who could not afford to make the voluntary health contribution. So we are fully aware that there is a discussion also on that matter. And finally, on health, the issue of the workforce. This is, of course, a major bottleneck for delivering quality health services, and it creates some risks for the success of the reform. It's particularly the case in rural areas where you can really have a restrictive access, in particular for specialized health services. And we know that the number of nurses also in Latvia is among the lowest. And of course, low salaries are a deterrent for nurses to work in the sector. So let's go now to education. There is also some positive outcomes. The Latvian education system performs quite well on learning and in achievements with PISA results, which are above EU average. But the quality of education depends on the place of residence and type of schools. So there are some challenges in the quality and efficiency of the system. Issue also of workforce, teacher shortages. In particular, if you look at the demographics, quite worrying. You have nearly 30% of the workforce that is more than 55 years old, and it's difficult to attract young people to the profession. Now, on higher education, also hinting to what Heinz said on fragmentation in research, there are also issues of fragmentation in higher education institutions and in programs which affect the quality. There are also issues still of labor market relevance and inclusiveness of higher education. On that, you had a significant reform, which we also support with the EU funds, but we still see that the participation in VET, in vocational education and training, remains low. You have a 38% participation, whereas at EU level this is 49%. Which is nearly half of, so this really should be, there's really a lot to be done on that. And we are also following very closely the developments on work-based learning approach, where the social partners also try to work together in order to bring closer schools, students and employers. And on adult learning, there is also quite low participation, though there are some improvements. However, the need for upskilling and reskilling is really key to the economic growth in the long run. And the low level of digital skills among the labor force also limits the use of digital technologies in economic environment, in enterprises, and the potential for innovation. And of course, behind all this, there is this issue of demographics, which is, of course, the worrying slide behind all the slides that we have shown. Well, you see here on the orange bars the negative natural change, and on the gray bars the sizable migration. And the population decline is projected to remain at 1% annually over the next 20 years. So while until now immigration has been the primary driver of population decline, we see that in the future the larger share will be, of course, coming from aging. So on the graph you can see that with a light blue line that the working age population decline is already steep, and it really is projected to accelerate. And we see 1.6% annually. And that means that the ratio of non-working population to working population is set to increase at a faster pace than before. So what does it mean concretely in terms of investment? But that means that we need indeed to invest in people and in human capital. You need to improve and speed up some reforms and capacity in the education and training systems for the upskilling and reskilling of the workforce, in particular to keep up with the technological changes. You need really everybody on board, so you need to really design some labor market policies where you can bring back those furthest away from the labor market. Also, your gender employment gap is not so bad. I mean, you still have to bring women on the market. You can bring back also people that have some work capacity issues. You can bring them through workability reforms. And then you need also to increase the inclusiveness of the growth, and with fostering some social inclusion policies and investment, and to improve the timely access to affordable social services and healthcare and good quality for all, and all this also you need to ensure that all over the territory of Latvia. So that's the main challenges for investment, human capital, and we'll be happy to also contribute to the discussion. I know that it is maybe time for the Latvian, yes, to...
Yes, thank you, Muriel Gon, for the in-depth overview on the social matters and inclusive growth, those aspects that help ensuring development. Now we are continuing to drive forward the wheel that Andres already started to drive forward. And now we would like to give the floor to the sort of response to the EC presentations. And now I would like to give the floor to our very good colleague, Raimond Alexeyenko from the Ministry of Economics. Raimond, the floor is yours. Thank you for the opportunity and for the fact that this report and these conclusions, I would say, are very, very corresponding or in line with how the Ministry of Economics sees Latvia's further development. Also with regard to the areas for development and the areas that require coming up with solutions. Now, as for the productivity, one of the key driving forces of the economy, we do not think that Latvian companies or enterprises can't produce products cheaply. The biggest problem is that we don't know how to sell, and this is where we agree with the EC's comments that innovation and development of human resources are the two key principles that will determine whether we will be able to development as rapidly and even more rapidly in the future. These two aspects are actually the two key aspects that we will be working within the nearest years. We're going to work in two directions. First of all, the homework that we need to do to put the system into order, and the other thing is that this report will help facilitate our negotiations amongst us and also with the EC. With regard to human resources, completely subscribing to the fact that digitalization matters are the matters that are important at a global level in terms of bringing or increasing the quality of education in Latvia. This year we are going to introduce the one of the top 200 IT education program within the Baltic Sea region. It will be a cooperation project between our leading universities and the university from the US. We started already carrying out practical work in order for the IT education and skills to be at a high enough level so that we could compete in even broader scale. An interesting matter of fact is that this is not only the government's priority. It's we have companies, leading Latvian companies coming into play in order to be able to launch this project. The other big topic that was mentioned, i.e. innovation, we have witnessed great development, and we are focusing on two areas here. The base for good and aggressive innovation are new companies, new enterprises, and there are good ideas that take off and bad ideas that don't take off, and this is how we see how what works and what doesn't. And this is exactly why we invest in this policy and in these solutions. So the investments are already showing positive results. The number of companies that are recognized as good companies, good new companies, are increasing by 30% every year. And the investments have increased by about 100% already. In some companies, in takeovers of large companies, these indices have already become tenfold. An important matter of fact, which we completely agree with the EC, is that innovation is not a percentage of the expenses. Innovation can be introduced in absolute numbers. In other words, if you have $10 billion, you can send someone to the moon from Latvia or from the US. It doesn't matter. But the big companies are the ones that have been able to come up with new products and innovate. And this is where we will have to work within ourselves and also in cooperation with the EC. I think that we have internally performed well. We see great activity, and initiatives from the government do not need to be as large as they have been, and we see that there is a forum among the large corporations in Latvia. They introduce new products, they develop them, and they market them. For example, Latvia's mobilized telephones has increased the R&D expenses 14 times, and the similar trends are following in other large corporations of Latvia.
Well, we should nevertheless continue discussing what the European Commission has indicated, that there is going to be less support for the large actors in terms of R&D support, and this is something that we'll have to continue discussing with the EC. If we invest in the SME innovation, we will not be able to find, global solutions and global products. We will have to support also the large enterprises as well. So that's it in a nutshell. There are some gaps that we need to address, but this is a very good report which describes perfectly the policy change that we need here in Latvia in order to be successful. Thank you. Thank you, Raimons, for the reaction from the Latvian side. I will now give the floor to our other responsible authority. Ministry of Economy is responsible for the National Reform Programme, whereas the Ministry of Finance is responsible for the Stability Programme. And I would like to give the floor to Iepazīstināšana Miglana from the Ministry of Finance, and I'll help put up her presentation, and you can start, if you wish, without waiting for the presentation. My name is Iepazīstināšana Miglana. I come from the Ministry of Finance, and I'll give you a brief insight into what is going on in Latvia. I would like to thank the Commission for the report. We highly appreciate that the European Commission is giving its evaluation, and it gives us, further knowledge of how we should work and how to address various gaps in various sectors. We might think ourselves that everything is fine here, but it needs an external sort of push as well for us to realize what gaps we need to address. So then, one of the recommendations given by the Commission for several years is to reduce the tax burden on low-income earners and shift it to other types of tax that does not hamper growth and collection of taxes. This recommendation has been voiced by EC for a number of years, and therefore it has been prioritized for a government for a number of years, and something that we had focused on for a number of years. And here you can see a graph which shows quite blatantly that Latvia was among top 16 countries in terms of having the worst tax burden on low-income earners, or the so-called tax wedge. And wages are at the level of 60%, 67% of the average wage are considered to be low income, and Estonia and Lithuania is also performing better than we are when it comes to this indicator. This is our reform, which has been heavily criticized, reform which is contributing to the reduction of income inequality and reduction of poverty. Although it has been criticized, we have raised the minimum wage quite significantly. The personal income tax for the low-income earners has been reduced from 23 to 20%. The non-taxable income has also been increased. Those who have guardianship are also benefiting from greater non-taxable income, and also those who have been paying the tax for their partners have also been liberated from paying this tax. And we also included here what the Ministry of Welfare did. They raised the benefits or family benefits to families with children. So if you have 2 children, you'll get 10 euros per month in addition. 3 children, 66 euros per month, and every next child plus 50 euros a month, which has significantly increased the income of households with children, families with children. This also indicates, as the European Commission underlined, showing the yellow curve, or the fat yellow curve, they showed that the net income to low-income earner bracket that are earning 67% of the average are receiving slightly more, but the progress is unsatisfactory, and that is a fact that we agree with. According to our estimates, this gap between the tax burden and income is reducing, and after the tax reform, the reduction has been a drastic one, from the 39.5 to 39.5%, from roughly 80, and here you can see the EU average as well. It is quite consistent, and we are gradually approaching the EU average levels. And this basically describes the same. It shows the benefits of the reform, the material benefits or returns of the reform for various income brackets. As you can see in the table to the right, people without children or families without children, almost all families without children have benefited. Of course, those who are earning more because of the solidarity tax are also, their wage has reduced slightly. But if you combine it with the childcare benefits, then everyone has gotten something. And here you can see income with children and without children, and together with the childcare benefits, you can see that the low-income earners are benefiting the most. Reform has been implemented successfully, and that is reflected in the tax collection indicators and the employment. If you break it down by income brackets, when it comes to tax collection, we have met the targets, even exceeded the targets by 0.8% last year. The increase was 8%, by the way, when it comes to taxes collected. And when it comes to the employment broken down by income brackets, you can see that those who are earning below the minimum income are suffering less from income inequality, and those who have above average wages are getting, the number of those people is increasing. So people are coming out of shadow, and unfortunately income inequality is due to rather large shadow or grey economy, which of course distorts all the data. So further steps by 1st of May, we have to submit the initial assessment of the tax reform. We have started working on the assessment of or evaluation of the tax reform. In order to have a full analysis, we need additional data. Not all the declarations have been submitted, therefore we don't have the input data for the analysis. And as regards to the guidelines, well, the next guidelines, or the policy rather, the next policy will be drafted this year to be submitted next May to the government, and we think that within the fiscal space we will be able to continuously reduce the income inequality, among the low-income earners, and we're going to shift the tax burden to the consumption and to the environmental tax or natural resource tax. Cadastral reform is hampering the real estate tax reform. As I know, the State Land Service will recalculate the cadastral values only in 2021, so therefore the real estate tax cannot be amended or changed until then. When it comes to the corporate income tax, we'll see what are the what's the efficiency of the corporate tax reform, and the public benefit organizations will also have to report back how the new tax regime has influenced the donations and charitable activities. And of course we'll also have to wait for the shadow economy data to come out. That's all from me. Thank you. Well, thank you, Eva, for the reaction of the Ministry of Finance. Yes, you talked about human capital, innovation, tax policy. We should now open the floor for the questions and answers. I expect a lot of questions, and I hope that there will be as many answers to those questions as questions. So who would like to be the brave one and kick off the Q&A session? Who would like to sort of shoot first, or, well, rather ask the question first? Yes, Irene Lieping from the Communications Industry Trade Union. Well, thank you very much for the information from the Ministry of Finance. Trade unions are fully behind different measures aimed at reducing the inequality of income and are aimed at promoting the well-being and welfare of the workers. And collective agreements, collective bargaining should be promoted as well as one of the instruments helping solve these problems. Social dialogue should be promoted as well to a greater extent, and other fiscal instruments or tools should be used in order to promote the sort of public activism. What are your suggestions, by the way, when it comes to the social dialogue, and what do you expect from the social partners, from the trade unions? Because we would like to be where the Sweden is with strong trade unions, but we are far from that, definitely. So.
So these are the question about the general agreements, collective agreements. Actually, we could give the opportunity for the respondents to think about their responses, and we could take another question. Maybe you could pass on the microphone so that we can hear the question. Hello. The deputy head of the Latvian healthcare professionals, Liga Mariņa. Thank you for the report. This semester report was very important for us and our organization, but we are concerned that healthcare will be of a primary character as it is indicated in the report. Because if we look at the forecasts of the Ministry of Finance, and if we consider the data given on the website on the Ministry of Finance, we can see that the indices for this year will be positive. But if we look at the next year, then the forecasts are as follows, that we will only get 3% of the GDP, and further on, in 2021, it will only be 2.8%. So my question is, what do we do? How do we fight for the fact that the government hears and listens to us, that healthcare in Latvia is important, that human resources are scarce in healthcare, and that people are lacking there, and that they need good remuneration, and that people in Latvia need high-quality healthcare. Thank you for the question. So we
healthcare financing would like to take those. Well, I think the healthcare financing question would be both to Muriel and the Ministry of Finance, and collective bargaining agreements also go to Muriel. Or do you like to take another question before you?
I have the feeling that I'm giving right at the beginning, so I guess the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Economy should also pop in at one stage. I mean, as far as social dialogue, I think the message by the Commission is quite clear on the importance of a robust social dialogue. We have been emphasizing this more and more in the different country report in the past few years. Also, there are new opportunities with the European Pillar of Social Rights, which should be implemented as a joint endeavor, joint commitment by several stakeholders at EU level, but also at national level, at citizen level, and of course at social partner level. It's not the Commission that will give a recipe, because we all know that there is also an important principle, which is respecting the autonomy of the social partners. And these are solutions that you must find in each national context, because we know that there are very different models in the EU how to organize. Of course, you have very specific neighbors from Finland and Sweden, but you have also other models. I know that because we finance some projects also under the ESF to help the social partners to increase the capacity. I know that some of your colleagues from maybe other trade unions, but you know, they come and visit also in Belgium to see how it is organized. And this is something that we think that also in the next programming period we strongly advise to continue taking this opportunity. But of course, it's not the Commission that will give the recipe of organization and how to increase also the membership. This is a very important issue in many member states. On this. And on healthcare, I mean, I think that the chapters on health are quite also to the point from the Commission on the finding that financing is low, that some reforms and all the pillars of the reforms of health, it has to be taken in a holistic manner. And of course, the question of remuneration of workforce is an important issue in that regard.
To add a bit, or Ministry of Finance spoke more on tax, but perhaps also could say a word or two on the expenditure side, on sort of the healthcare as a percentage of the expenditure. Finanšministrija var pāris vārdus piebilst par veselības aprūpes finansējumu kā procentu.
Thank you for the question. Yes, I represent the tax sector more, so I can't really talk about healthcare. But certainly, healthcare is important. And when developing the budget for the next year, all mandates regarding this sector are given to the Ministry of Healthcare, and the Ministry of Healthcare represents this position as to how much money is necessary, and hand in hand with our ministry, we're looking for solutions. I can't really provide you with a recipe on how to get funds. We pay as much taxes as we pay. Maybe I could provide comment on collective agreements. It was mentioned that availability of human resources are one of the biggest challenges that we are going to continue facing, and we are going to look for solutions. And the availability of of human resources are directly linked to remuneration, one-to-one. And people are interested in working in certain areas only if there's respectable remuneration. And people typically return to companies who pay, let's say, 20–30% more than other companies. And this is, it explains, it's obvious. In the areas where competition isn't becoming difficult. So we support the forms of collective agreements. For example, in construction, we see that it is a very efficient tool to combat shadow economy and to provide certain levels of remuneration. We also see this happening in hospitality industry, and we see that they provide a better contribution, a broader contribution than just having a collective agreement as such. All right, trade unions were very active. Now we could give the floor to the lady who wants to ask a question on the other side of the room. Can you hear me? Yes, very well. Veronika Jurce, the Ministry for Regional Development and Environmental Protection. Yes, we heard this regional aspect, and we see that this improving the situation of regions is very important. We can only subscribe to that, and we have to understand that the regional policy has so far not been very successful. Firstly, we have to agree that this is a long-term approach to eliminate disparities between regions. And in the initial phases, we weren't aiming for obtaining resources, but instead for solving everyday, like, trivial matters. And we have much to do in terms of the fact that regional development does not only fall within the responsibility of just one ministry. It's a horizontal matter, and you have to put in great effort. We have to look for new ideas with regard to how do we find this perfect horizontal approach for development. Our ministry is working on the guidelines for regional policy for 2021-27, and we have a new long-term goal, which is to reduce disparities, regional disparities, within the next 20 years, and for the regions to achieve only 75% of the Latvian, let's say, average. We are also going to plan regional quotas for other planning regions. We're going to exercise this regional approach. So, where's the question, right? We have to understand that we have more purposefully, we have to use municipal resources and budgets more purposefully, and for this regard, we are going to work for supporting innovation and productivity, to attract human resources, highly qualified professionals, to ensure the availability of social services, as well as strengthening the capacity, as well as regional and territorial development. So the question here is, are there any good examples from any member states with regard to having reached this goal of 75% within 20 years? And in terms of the measures I mentioned for regional development, what would be the most suitable ones, the most purposeful ones, and what are your recommendations? Well, maybe I could forward this question to the afternoon, because we're going to talk about the correlation to the report and to the investment needs and the regions. So let's hold it back for the afternoon. And we know that Lithuania and Estonia is about 75% in this regard. So we don't have to look far for examples. Artur Zeps, the deputy director of the University of Latvia student, the Association of Latvian Universities. So what are your recommendations with regard to the lacking finance in strengthening the capacity and skills? Now, until we give the opportunity for Muriel to respond to this, let's take another question. Hello. Ines Stabiņa, the Confederation of Employers of Latvia. I would like to ask two questions, but firstly, I would like to thank the European Commission for a very well-performed, detailed analysis. And in our organization, we have been working already since 2012 in the semester process. When we see that this time it's very thorough, and it's also very critical. It's a very thorough audit of Latvia. And I would have to say that maybe the European Commission has a more objective view, and it can provide a very clear view of solving problems. Now, before asking a question, I could provide a comment. Seeing the report projects of national institutions, we can see that the conclusions drawn in these audits, they are not fully transposed into the national agendas. And I frequently see the position of various officials who say that the European semester is just a formality. So my wish would be to collaborate, to work together, indeed, and to eliminate the defects identified in the audit in a common way. This is a general comment, but I have also a practical question. The Latvian Employers Confederation, with relation to innovation, in the tax policy reform context, was planning to help divide the undivided tax within the social from the labor.
And the question is, why isn't that included in your analysis? That was one of our proposals that we integrated into our tax reform. So that's a question to the European Commission. Why has not that been taken into account? Another question to the Commission and the local authorities also with regard to the labour market needs. How to make sure that the employer organizations and social partners are closer engaged in a debate and a dialogue regarding various labour affairs. As you explained, there are problems or gaps or major challenges when it comes to the labour market. How to make sure that the engagement is a lot closer, more active. Wanted to underline that in a project in which I participated and had the honour to participate, where we, discussed with ministries these issues, I found it that they lack understanding, or, well, lack understanding of what the role of the employers' organizations and the labor organizations is in solving labor market various issues, including occupational health and safety and so on and so forth, and various employment aspects. Although, organizations have been partners in various ESF projects, but we still lack a sort of clear vision from the government what the precise role of social partners should be or could be. Another comment. Although sometimes we hear about it, but social partners and social dialogue is still underdeveloped, still quite foggy here in Latvia. There are a lot of misunderstandings. We don't really have a classic dialogue, which is sort of classic dialogue between the employers and the trade unions. It is not a dialogue between. It shouldn't be a dialogue between the government and individual corporations or companies. Thank you for hearing me out, and looking forward to same construction, fruitful cooperation in the future. So we had a question about the quality of education, and
we had a question about national reform program.
We have a question about the role of social partners in the national reform program, drafting and implementation. This is question to Raimons. And why didn't the report of the EC include the zero reinvested tax, profit tax? Why hasn't that been covered?
Important measure to increase competitiveness, according to the Employers Association. So we have three questions. Three responses, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I think the question was the recommendations for financing. So I will reply that this is not so simple, and that what you should look at is how we analyze many different aspects that affect tertiary education and higher education and university. And the first thing that we underline was the fragmentation aspects. By the way, we contribute with the EU funds also to improving some co-financing in certain reforms and improvement in the quality assurance of the system, in of course rationalizing also some universities. But we see that there are still a blooming of different study programs that maybe there is a need for reflection, while of course we know that the student population is declining. And there is also this issue of STEM, which is insufficient in Latvia at a university level, and of course it impacts very much it has knock-on effect on other policy, on research and development, innovation capacity of the Latvian society and business sector in general. We would also like that it is not only seen as a kind of direct financing issue. It comes from before. I mean, if you don't have STEM at university, it's also because you have not had a good STEM before. So you need to look at a kind of cycle of, in a holistic approach, the education sector before even university. And then you have also some issue of inclusion of certain type of student population, such as disabled students, the gender issue. So we wouldn't like to look at the pure financing thing. You really have to look at the structure reform part and the different building blocks of an efficient university sector.
A bit of a hot potato, and we'll start with Raimons, and then I'll give the floor to Heinz. Well, this is a very broad question, but if you can, please answer shortly. Well, first of all, it is obvious that a social dialogue, or the dialogue between the government, employers and trade unions, a trilateral or tripartite social dialogue is very important. We prioritize it, in the government. But, there's always room for improvement. We could have more social partners involved in the dialogue. We could always broaden and expand social dialogue. That's a given. And I can also agree that when it comes to the European semester, quite often everyone looks at the European semester with some doubt or doesn't really take it seriously. But there's a good news, as we are approaching the next programming period, we unavoidably are forced to listen more to what the European Commission is saying about the European semester and so on and so forth, because that will have an impact on our long-term policies, financing policies as well. That's why we take it very seriously, and we also take very seriously various interim reports as well. But this year, of course, due to the oncoming planning period, these recommendations will be taken very, very seriously. There's going to be a major focus on them. Now, as regards to what concerns the human capital and human resource availability, or the scarcity of shortage of the workforce, when the companies are facing the problems with getting the qualified hands into their company, we reach out to the NGOs and ask them, to lobby, raise the awareness and talk about this, have different campaigns. Also, when it comes to the labor market forecasting, the process of forecasting, we feel that as long as there's the government funding, there is a tripartite dialogue. As soon as there is no government funding, then nobody's really interested in having a dialogue. So we need to have a trilateral or tripartite government, not a dialogue between the government and the service providers who are providing certain services to the government or assistance to the government. I would like to also urge companies or corporate entities here that, it takes time and resources to solve problems, that you need to devote your private resources to help the government solve a particular problem. Heinz, would you like to also add something?
The advantage of, the report is that we use the expertise of many, many people, and it's not Muriel and I who read the whole thing, but we have a number of experts that do that, and I take advantage of Janis, who wrote that segment, to tell us more precisely before I say something wrong here.
Thank you, Heinz. I will speak in Latvian. Eiropas komisija ir vairāk reizes pēdējo divu gadu laikā.
European Commission in recent 2 years has commented the Latvian tax reform a number of times, and in this report we are not giving any particular details. We're only referring to our previous comments or statements, and last year's report, by the way, has a much greater focus on the corporate tax reform and so on and so forth. But the main findings or the main conclusions are as follows when it comes to the tax reform. Yes, indeed, zero reinvested profit tax. And capital gains tax, or sort of shifting to a capital gains tax, can promote the competitiveness or the investment among companies, and Estonia has conducted a number of studies of what kind of impact it has had on the businesses in Estonia. The zero reinvested profit tax, it has been a major factor for SMEs, for whom it has allowed to generate additional resources, but had a very little impact on the GDP and productivity. Again, referring to the Estonian example, and we have modelled also the potential economic impact, and have concluded that there is going to be very little impact on the GDP growth in the long run. Thank you. Well, let's take 3 questions in a row, and the gentleman here is already showing me that if I don't allow him to ask the question, he will be very angry at me, followed by Madam Kazorka, and then Mr. Balzans is also looking very serious, and he should also be given floor. Martin Schmoes from the Welfare Department of the Riga City Council. I have a question to the local officials. European Commission report or country report, in fact, emphasizes a lot of issues that were mentioned in previous reports, like, for example, the social transfer, inequality, poverty, and healthcare, and so on and so forth. I mean, these are not new issues for us. And line ministries have tried to solve these problems or address these challenges by raising the GMI, for example, in 2014. Concept was approved, the government concept or initiative was approved. However, a lot of line ministry initiatives have been cut short by the officials of the Ministry of Finance that are saying that there's no money for those initiatives. And in general, I should say that the social policy has not been amongst the government priorities. This is what we can see from everything that has been happening. That's not a challenge, really, but my question is about if, and if at all, your ministries are analyzing what are the consequences of not investing in social problems and what kind of impact it might have on sustainability if there's a lack of funding for the healthcare needs, how that affects the labor market, for example, some sort of a cross-sectoral analysis. I do assume that you have something like that in your ministry, don't you? So, lack of investment, what kind of consequence or impact does it have? Then followed by Madam Kazorka, and then we'll have 2 more questions, and we'll have the answers. Ivet Kazorka from the Providence think tank would like to continue the same question that was asked to the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and would like to also address it to the representatives of the European Commission, because several European semester country reports have indicated that one of the key problems in Latvia is low funding for social needs that has various kinds of impact or consequences, low accessibility of healthcare services, as well as poverty amongst the senior citizens and various problems that those with disabilities, non-availability of the housing as well. So 2 questions to the EC. How do we compare to other countries, international context, and is that so unusual that country reports indicate or point towards lack of funding? Is that the usual case, or do you always, sort of urge them to cut down probably their social spending? And the second question to the European Commission, in your reports again, you have indicated, problems with the funding for social needs. Is there any country which has, showed major progress when it comes to increasing social spending that we can learn from? Because, our perception here in Latvia is that all in our region, sort of the new member states are addressing social problems in a very similar way, are trying to solve social problems through labor sort of interventions and are trying to reduce the taxes in order to boost or trying to reduce the taxes on low-income earners to boost the competitiveness and so on and so forth. How has that contributed to the populism is another question, but is there any country that whose example we should follow, sort of a golden standard in terms of reconciling somehow, social support and competitors, these aspects? Thank you for the question.
But towards the Commission, is there good practice examples where countries, especially in our part of the world, have been able to do social policy reforms and financing and increase that substantially?
And the floor to Egils Balzans now. And, first, Tatiana Muravska, and then Egils Balzans.
Thank you very much for the European Commission representation, European Commission for this organizing this event. I have more general question, and that's why I'm addressing to the Commission in English. As I was already, it was mentioned my name and surname. I'm Professor Tatiana Muravska, and I work for the University of Latvia European Studies Center. And I'm also last year and this year participating in the Strategic Advisory Forum. It's ESPON project for providing the report for the European Commission for the cohesion policy future 2035 and even beyond. We discussed an international environment and economic developments and digitalization, etc., a lot of different things. Among them, we also touched the slowdown of economic development, and that was mentioned in the presentation today. So with respect to the slowdown in economic development of even major EU member states, and the possibility for catching up potential increase of Latvia, my question is about whether the Commission, taking this international environment, the slowdown, and also the election to the Parliament, whether you are already foreseen, or maybe not, I don't know, just a question, the adjustment or different indicators for the cohesion policy in the member states, those who are really need these cohesion funds, as Latvia, for example, and whether there will be the adjustment to the criteria and adjustment to the cohesion funds foreseen in the budget, because it's not, as we know, voted in the Parliament, so there might be changes. Whether you foresee any possible changes in the future in relation to all these factors. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a million for the question. But this is also the case where we will send the question over to afternoon, because we'll have Normons Popans, we'll have Angela, DG Regio, who are in this negotiations more deeply involved, you know, in the Council and Parliament, especially including the Regio files. So we will send that question to the afternoon. Egils, the last question. Pēdējais jautājums.
The last question to Egils Baldzāns. The Free Trade Union Association. My name is Egils Baldzāns. We have already asked a couple of questions. There are many questions that were pointed out by the EC were solved by, let's say, shadow economy and social matters. And then if we look at corporate as well as competition matters from the perspective of the Baltic states, because it's our closest economic space. So the situation currently is as follows, that the trade unions have reached out to the governments, and they said that even though 2 years ago we witnessed the rapid growth of minimal remuneration, but we are still lagging behind at least by 100 euros per month, let's say, from Estonia and Lithuania. And if we look at the net, as well as purchase parity standards, then compared to Lithuania, our indices are 26% less, and in comparison to Estonia, it's 21% less in terms of a full-time salary. And it is interesting to me at which moment should this matter be addressed, and when minimum wages should be increased. So this could substantially contribute to the competitiveness. Thank you. Maybe Muriel could talk about the social matters.
And good practice examples. And then Heinz will have to take the one on minimum wage in the Baltics.
Maybe Heinz also could comment on the funding for social issues, as it's quite linked to ECFIN also concerns. But just as a kind reminder, as you know, social policies are first a matter of competence of member states. Let's not forget that. But if there is something that we know how to do in the EU, this is to meet and to discuss and to identify best practices. And there are numerous fora at EU level where for education, for welfare policies, for employment, where member states and stakeholders, social partners, NGOs can discuss and compare. There are numerous indicators that allow comparison, and by the way, with the country reports, there was also published a communication called Chapeau, where you can have all the indicators comparing also between the member states. So there are numerous data for comparison. And I think one key message is that, of course, also in the framework of the funding, and we will come back this afternoon, there are frameworks and fora where you can discuss also best practices in certain cohesion policy or social policy. So, but of course, there is no magical solution. Each member state has a history of constitution of its type of welfare state, and you have, of course, to start from where you are, and compare, find sometimes very innovative solutions. But also looking indeed at neighbors, but not only neighbors. There are some other member states that have found, faced to the same kind of difficulties, some solutions. And of course, if the situation in Latvia or some Baltic states has some specific features, one should not forget that indeed the current trends because of globalization and so on impacts many member states, even those that have had traditional welfare states and important funding. I mean, there are also works that are going on where Latvia contribute in the OECD context. In a few days, weeks, they are going to work on the issue of the impact of automatization and digitalization on jobs. I mean, if we speak about the middle income trap, you know, I mean, you have, of course, very specific problems. But if I look at my own member state, the one I know better, you know, France, I could also have same concerns on certain regions of the French territory. We know that some jobs will be distracted, others will be created, but they are not on the same territory. So I guess it also applies to other member states. So there are the same kind of challenges everywhere, but definitely there are many fora where best practices and with similar questions can be discussed at EU level, where you're all encouraged to participate.
Thanks. Heinz, on the three Baltics, the minimum wages.
Yeah, from the Commission side or from the EU side, we do not have a norm that says your government share should be X. I mean, countries are way too diverse for that. We have a recommendation in the case of Latvia, and to some extent that's shared by your Baltic neighbors, because you combine a few features that you have all come from essentially a flat tax background, which other countries don't have. You've grown very quickly. That means you have pockets of the economy where people have gotten wealthy very quickly, but you have people left behind. So in a sense, the spread between, let's say, what current income levels are and what people that are receiving welfare get is rather wide. What one has to look at is not just, in a sense, the overall government share, but I mean, we look in some ways at the way taxes are collected here. If you have a progressive tax, you do more in terms of income redistribution than if you have a flat tax. and also the way you spend it. So in that sense, the only thing we do here is sort of give a direction of where a solution might be found. We do not, as I said, we do not advocate a specific country model, but if you look at examples on welfare reform, maybe what has been done recently in Poland might be an inspiration, but in a sense, each country has to look for itself because each country is unique. And the Commission cannot and does not want to intervene in the local policy debate as to what exact solution you can find. We look at we do the analysis and then we give it to you. In a sense, the same answer applies also to the minimum wages. The minimum wages, of course, that's a two-edged sword. I mean, on the one hand, you hurt your competitiveness. On the other hand, it has also positive impacts in terms of income distribution, in terms of also migration. I mean, you are a country that has lost lots of people to other areas, and of course, how you set minimum wages influences whether you keep people in the areas or not. I mean, that is a question of calibration for the country. So in that sense, I will also not be able to give you an exact number. I mean, there you have to, I mean, in a sense, each country for itself. I mean, of course, we criticize things like, the guaranteed minimum income, which I think it's like 53 euros a month. I mean, I don't think you can live on that, even in the remote regions of Latvia. So, I mean, that's an aspect where we say, okay, that is too low, but what number you should target for, I mean, I will not be able to tell you.
Let us put our hands together for these four wonderful panelists.
Labdien visiem klātesošajiem!
Dear ladies and gentlemen, hello, and those who are viewing our live stream online as well, hello, and welcome to the second session or the afternoon session of today's workshop or event, which will focus on the cohesion policy. This year, in scope of the European semester, a new transparent tradition was launched. This Annex D, which offers a Commission vision on future investment, future national investment of Latvia, is very important, and that way European Commission is transparently communicated what it expects of the member states or what it offers the member states, and this will launch a dialogue on future investment plans of Latvia among different stakeholders, and we will also discuss that today. And as first I would like to give the floor to Normans Popens, who will in particular focus on the investment priorities as offered, as proposed by the Commission. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you for hosting our event. Thank you to the European Commission representation in Latvia, and thank you for coming here, all of you for coming here, because this is a very important event where we not only present the document which stems from the country report and indicates not only the reforms that we have in the country report, but also brings the Annex D suggested investment initiatives and information that might be useful for Latvia as it plans the next investment period. And for many years we've been involved as the Commission in the planning process. In previous years we drew Latvia's attention to the fact that country-specific recommendations should be funded where appropriate from the EU structural funds as well, and different ex-ante conditionalities were also discussed when it comes to the investment plans. So this is nothing new. it makes sense that together we are working in scope of the European semester. And why are we launching the informal dialogue today? Because we don't want to waste any more time, and our experience and my personal experience from the previous programming period shows that the sooner you start discussing it without even knowing the size of the national envelope and the amount of funding, you start very early on discussing the priorities and the implementation and funding of those priorities. The sooner we launch this informal debate or discussion, the swifter we'll be able to adopt the OPs and programs and the activities later on, and we'll be able to provide the investment funding quickly. And it seems, our experience also shows that it's going to be a slow start, although we've started the dialogue very well in advance, and the Latvian program was approved, in a very timely fashion. Unavoidably, it was delayed because of new ex-ante conditionalities, and new management and control bodies had new instructions, and we had to develop smart specialization strategy together as well. And then, when we adopted the regulations for the next planning period or programming period, we focused or emphasized continuity and simplification. Why? Because you have to build on those positive elements that we have acquired in the previous programming period, and the ones that are successful, management and information systems working just fine. It's been accredited by the Commission. It doesn't need any further validation, verification, or whatever. Simplified cost calculations are also very efficiently applied. And, we should also keep the momentum and build upon those positive experiences. And in the next programming period, we'll have 5 funding objectives instead of 11, and we're going to discuss those objectives in greater detail today, together with DG employee Angela, who's our department counterpart in the DG Regio, and she'll elaborate on 4 objectives that we are going to fund. And we have a new objective, the 5th objective, or the 5th target. And I'm very happy myself personally for this 5th objective, because it is pro-regional development and pro-regional cooperation, pro-regional partnerships, pro-small cities, pro-countryside, and it brings, investment which is significant, of course, to sort of regional context, if you will. But, we'll talk about that in greater detail later on today. And as I already mentioned, we have cut down the number of objectives, but the presentation will not be shorter. We have, again, 30 different slides. Hope you'll be able to bear with us through this lengthy presentation. Apart from simplification and continuity, there are other core principles like partnerships, cooperation with NGOs, cooperation between various levels of management, of administration, the government, local governments, beneficiaries, non-governmental organizations. This dialogue across all levels of administration is something that we prioritize, and we hope to launch this dialogue today on the next programming period, and we hope that similar exchange of views will also happen throughout the programming period or throughout the implementation period, and we hope that there's going to be a close cooperation with other regions or other countries in the region in scope of the macro regional strategy. And probably we'll draw some experiences from other countries and from other regions. And we know that we shouldn't be working in isolation. We'll achieve very little if we work in isolation, so we need to cooperate. And social inclusion is also very important. We're extensively focusing nowadays on ensuring that those core principles of the European Charter of Human Rights are also respected, the principles that are also transposed in other laws and regulations, so that this horizontal priority or the income equality is respected, and Muriel will talk about ESF Plus in this respect. So it's about, all the funds that are based on the same core principles, and we should also focus on synergies or cooperation with other EU financing instruments like EU Invest, large financial facility, and Horizon as well, Connecting Europe facility, another funding product for the interconnections or for boosting connectivity between EU member states. And all of these tools should make sure that there is no duplication, there's no overlap when it comes to these instruments, that these instruments complement each other and allow us to achieve the same goals, and these are the principles that are at the core of our work. But you'll hear more from the presentation, so this is where I should put a stop. And I spoke the whole time Latvian, but my colleagues will, of course, speak English. And I hope that the translators will be able to deal or cope with Euro terminology or EU terminology.
To be more consistent with terminology that we use, but let's go ahead with our presentation, and then we will have questions and answer session where we would be happy to hear your comments and answer all your questions related to funds, possibly, if possible, not to the government hearing, which is happening or something. Thank you.
So thank you and welcome back. Happy to be here again this afternoon. So before looking at indeed a little bit the future, my task is to bring you for a few minutes on the achievements, the current achievements of the cohesion policy. And I mean, the main message is that Latvia and the citizens of Latvia have benefited and continue to benefit in a significant manner from the EU support. I mean, one key figure is that 60% of public investment in Latvia come from the EU funds support. And the EU budget has contributed, therefore, on many different policies and economic development, creation of jobs, the creation of innovative business environment, the promotion of social inclusion, mobility, and the protection of environment. And all this in order also to support structural changes and reforms in the economic and the social field via the support of investment for research and innovation and education and social policies. And we believe that really Latvia is a very good example of what the EU funds can bring for the benefit of people and the economy. Under the current programming period, we have calculated that 2.7% of the GDP was coming from the positive impact of the cohesion policy investment. So a bit on the implementation against the background of the achievements of cohesion policy. Quite some positive developments. 81% of the funds have already been allocated to different projects. And although the payment rate is average and should be accelerated, overall the implementation is in good, has achieved good pace towards achieving the operational program's objective and also bringing progress to some EU 2020 targets. And if we look at tangible results, we can see, for example, in 2018 that we have successfully supported the networking with research institutions. which means that we have enabled cooperation projects with the goal of moving closer to the market and bringing higher value and economic growth. And for example, 40 research projects have already borne fruit for commercialization. Also, apparently you were not on those roads yesterday or this morning, Normunds. We have also contributed with the ESIF to the building and modernization of more than 300 kilometers of roads, both at regional level and in connection with the TEN-T network. And the support also has been approved for more than 3,000 businesses, including more than nearly 400 startups. And also, ESIF funds have contributed to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 8,570 tons of CO2. So I don't know how we calculated this, but I'm sure that this is true. And as far as ESF support is concerned, in 2018, the ESF measures have supported 70,000 unemployed. That means that those persons were supported in their integration in the labor market, including 19,000 young people under the age of 25. And the ESF plus measures, ESF measures, have also supported 12,000 persons with disabilities, which brought better integration to the labor market for some of them and better integration to society as a whole. Actually, if you look at the ESIF Open Data Platform, we encourage you to surf on it and go, and you can find a lot of interesting data with regarding indicators for implementation. Here you can see on the slides quite interesting examples of policy projects. The first one, and that will also complement my reply to your question on how the funding can further funding for universities. First is House of Science building for the University of Latvia. Where this project addressed the issue of performance of Latvia indeed in research and innovations and higher education. And it brought together natural science, medicine faculties and research institutions in a modern compound with cutting-edge research equipment. And that helped, and it's helping to bridge the gap between science, business, and society at large. Actually, if you look at the cost and the contribution, so there was ERDF, of course, but there was also InvestEU money. So also to complement my reply, our reply on this, that you should not only look at ESIF funds as such, but you have also all the investment plan to bring about Horizon, indeed, that was mentioned, and that's very important to fertilize, actually, the different source of funding. And then you have another project, which is only an example of revitalization of some cities and areas in, here it's in Latgali, the ones that we have chosen, but it's also an example of how the ESIF funds and here ERDF has improved the living standards of people locally. Another example from the European Social Fund here, it's the ESF grants for social entrepreneurship, where really we bridge business and social purposes, where 200 social enterprises were supported with grants, and with already 217 disadvantaged unemployed were supported. And it's a good example also of funding already supporting structural reforms, because indeed you had a new law in 2018 for social enterprises, where you have for the first time the definition of what a social enterprise is, and you have clearer rules for companies that want to operate in this area. And of course, the ESF can complement this legislative progress, and vice versa, the legislative process, new law can help making the ESF projects much more efficient. So a little bit on the architecture of what we have proposed for the future. Also, to complement the reply on where we update our criteria for cohesion. So, of course, there is a bit of continuity from the current experience, but there is also a budget, cohesion budget, which is really directed to the future, and that indeed are influenced by the main big challenges that we see for the EU and its member states to face in the next few years. So the common provisions now have tried to encompass many different funds, which means that there are more joint rules for the delivery of the different funds under shared management. And we have also the continuation of the idea of partnership, which is important to implement that. The ERDF and the Cohesion Fund, we will come back on the specific objectives when we describe the different objectives of the Annex D. But we have also, in order to match this future challenge, we have also proposed some thematic concentration requirements that have, of course, open for discussion and that are discussed in the negotiations currently. But this was also to underline this importance of taking into account the future challenges. And on territorial cooperation, we have a self-standing regulation, but with a new item, which is the integration of the external financing instruments like pre-accession assistance, neighborhood policy, etc. Now, for the European Social Fund Plus, the main idea is that we brought together, indeed, different former regulations in order to create more synergies for the different building blocks of employment, education, health, and social policies. And this with the aim of supporting, indeed, the European Pillar of Social Rights, as you have mentioned, Normans. One important aspect is that the fund for the European aid for the most deprived is now inside the ESF Plus, and that we will request each member state to spend at least 2% of the social inclusion measures for the actions that FEAD used to finance, or that FEAD will continue to finance. And of course, we, because of the persistence, in particular in some member states, we have emphasized the issue of youth unemployment very much. As for the other funds, the link with the country report with the country-specific recommendation is, of course, very much emphasized. The ESF Plus contains also a new transnational action strand, In particular, the health program is enshrined now in the ESF, so that will help also to make more synergies between the different ESF interventions. So, last thing I think for me, before Angela pops in, is to repeat some buzzwords about this future cohesion policy. We modernize because we focus on smart, low carbon and inclusive growth. We link it better to the European semester. We have enabling conditions to better prepare the environment of interventions. We make it more flexible also. We will have a midterm review in order to reset maybe the clock at a certain moment to take into account some developments, but also to adapt to emerging circumstances. We have experienced in the past few years, migration crisis and big changes in the economy due to globalization, demography and technology. Final buzzwords is simpler. We want an easier and faster programming induction, as you said. I mean, I think that for Latvia, we have good grounds to start with the management and control system that are rather okay, and with a single audit principle.
Thank you, Muriel. Good afternoon, everybody. It is always a pleasure for me to be also always in Latvia and seeing many faces already from familiar faces from the monitoring committee. And it's also a pleasure to participate in this launch event. This launch event, which is, I think, the beginning of almost, Normus, you were referring to almost 2 years. Yeah. So I think we will have time to exchange and discuss, but I'm not worried about that because we have a very, very good relationship with the Latvian authorities at all levels, and it's always a pleasure to work with the Latvian authorities. By the way, we already even started yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, we had already a first meeting with the Ministry of Finance, with Boris, in order to start moving already on the agenda of the future cohesion policy in Latvia. So now in this part of the presentation, which is going to be a trio presentation between me, then Muriel, and then Normus, I think we are going to take you now to the future of the cohesion policy in Latvia and the main building blocks and how we have proceeded to come as we are today. First is that, as Normus was referring to the 5 policy objectives, which have been simplified, consolidated into 5, but I will also like to call and name here the word of flexibility, because I see that there have been already many questions about the definition of the policy objectives. What about the previous thematic objectives? I don't find the keywords, so I don't find the sector, I don't find the activity, it was finance. So I think we need to see that in a very, very broad perspective, and we believe that these 5 policy objectives will be bringing simplification, consolidation also of the current objectives, so we don't think there is any revolution, anything new, continuity, but hopefully continuity in a more simple and flexible manner. These 5 policy objectives, which are proposed in the Commission proposal, the first thing and the first, let's say, message today is that we consider that they should apply and they should be financed in Latvia. The Commission proposal for some member states is not to go through and about the 5 policy objectives, is to concentrate resources in one or the other policy objectives. So the first analysis from the Commission side, based on the country report, is that the 5 policy objectives are relevant and should be financed in Latvia under the cohesion policy. Just also to make some clarity, and also because to anticipate some questions we had already, is that the partnership principle, the administrative capacity building, and the cooperation will not be specific objectives, will not be financed separately, but they will be embedded in the different policy objectives. So moving, as I said, we are moving gradually to the Latvian reality, and here this slide, so we are moving for the 5 policy objectives. Then we have the Commission proposal already put forward the figures for the allocation for Latvia and the split of the figures between funds, ERDF, Cohesion Fund, and SIF+. Then, in addition to this, we had also what Normus and Muriel mentioned already is the thematic concentration. And beyond the figures, I mean, for the moment, the Commission proposal is to concentrate 35% of ERDF in policy objective 1, financing innovation and smart industrial transformation, and 30% of ERDF funds to be dedicated to clean energy, climate change, green and blue investment. And also 6% of the overall ERDF envelope to be dedicated to sustainable urban development. As Muriel referred, we know that this is subject of discussion and negotiation in the Council, but I think what is very important is that we take here the message, the political message being that at the level of the European Union, the main priorities are for the moment innovation and smart industrial transformation and climate change. The same for, without forgetting, of course, the urban reality. Then the same goes for the thematic concentration of ESF, where ESF foresees 25% of ESF allocation to be devoted to social inclusion. And as said, this is minimum. We are here talking about minimum requirements. This is not meaning that this will be the outcome of the negotiation with the Latvian authorities. I think we have extensively discussed this morning some challenges. So these percentages have to be seen as minimum requirements from what is the legislative starting point, but not the end point of the negotiation with the Latvian authorities. Then from this 25% dedicated to social inclusion, 2% should be at least dedicated to material deprivation. And then there is also another concentration requirement for youth employment, around 10%, but only if Latvia will qualify for this. And this will be, for the moment, we don't think it will qualify, but figures will be available, I think, at the end of this year. So moving forward, why we have this morning in hands, and Muriel have made a big detailed presentation of the challenges for Latvia in terms of structural reforms, in terms of investment-related challenges. Why I'm coming back to these challenges? The idea here is that we wanted to make a summary of the relevant challenges that we consider are the challenges that we are going to address under the cohesion policy. In fact, also some questions that we had, including from the government of Latvia, was why the country report is in some areas bigger and addressing bigger challenges than then the Commission priorities for cohesion policy, by saying cohesion policy is not addressing all the challenges of Latvia. And the answer is indeed, the cohesion policy will not be able to address all the challenges as highlighted in the country report. So the country report, it addresses all the Latvian challenges, but we consider that they need to be tackled through structural reforms first, and then also through investment, but also for this investment part, then we will need to mobilize all types of investments, including private investments, including public investment, including EU investment, and then also EU investment meaning Connecting Europe facility, could be Horizon, could be EU invest through financial instruments. So I think this is what I think is important. I would like to stress this afternoon, because we had many questions already from this, is that yes, indeed, the country report challenges are much bigger than the ones that cohesion policy is going to try to address and finance. But because we cannot do it all, we need to concentrate in some priorities, and we need also to get some value added and some high impact, and not spreading the cohesion policy money in all challenges. So that's why we wanted to illustrate here. Also because, as Muriel was presenting, we have also the current programming period which is running. And although we had good track in terms of absorption capacity, in terms of selection of projects, well, the outcomes and the results of this programming period are not there yet. So what we have also done now in analyzing the challenges for post-2020 is that we have taken the photography of the challenges in the country report today, but we have also tried to factor in what will be the results that we will be still achieving under the current programming period. And only from there, this is where we said, okay, these are the remaining investment needs for Latvia. So then these two slides that I'm presenting you is a bit repetitive, if I may say, from what you have seen this morning, but it's maybe in the language and in the order of driving you now to the Commission priority proposals for the cohesion policy. The first two in the slides, they are relating, of course, to, and you will see they are structured now by policy objective. So the first two address the challenges of policy objective 1. The first being the low innovation performance of Latvia. We have seen this morning there has been a huge increase from 48 to 60% in terms of average, in terms of innovation performance. Latvia is now a moderate innovator in the innovation scoreboard, but still you are still at 60%. So what we also see is that, I think it was also mentioned this morning, is the level of investment in RTD. The level of investment expenditure in RTD is very, very low. Here you are really missing the target, the EU 2020 targets, where I think it was 1.5% the target, and the current, I think, expenditure is around 0.5%. So very far from the target. And then within that overall investment target, the level of the private expenditure is even lower, around 0.14%. So this is just to illustrate still, the challenges ahead in terms of innovation. Within that, the SME sector and the SME innovation sector is having also enormous difficulties. Enterprises have a very small size, with very, very low added value, with high resource intensity, and a huge problem in terms of integration in the global value chains. I have as an indication here that Latvia has 65% of SMEs concentrated in low technology industries, and only 2% of the companies are in the high technology sectors. So this is the first challenge we would like to address. The second is the insufficient use of digitalization. I think this morning it was Hans who put the graph on digitalization, and indeed Latvia ranks high in the offer of digital public services, but there is a real problem in terms of the uptake of the companies and of the people who don't use sufficiently these digitalization opportunities. And here I would like to mention the opportunities for e-commerce and e-business, which is really lagging behind in Latvia. We also mentioned the third element I wanted to mention, and this chapter is the public research and education systems that we also discussed this morning, that they are very, very highly fragmented. Fragmented not only in terms of geography, but also in terms of discipline as subjects, and there is no enough result orientation, apply science-driven research. And the fourth element here is the lack of availability of human resources. We also discussed the scarcity of the human resources in general in the Latvian economy, but here again, in terms of RTD, there is a clear need for human resources capacity, both in business and in the public sector. If I will move now to the relevant challenges for PO2. Here the country is on track. Latvia is doing well in terms of emission reduction targets, EU 2020, and also in terms of renewable energies. I think Latvia is well placed to meet the targets. However, the energy consumption remains very high, and the country remains very high resource energy intensive. The main sectors being transport at 30%, households 29%, and industry also is quite high. Although industry energy consumption is lowering at the EU in average, Latvia is still increasing the energy consumption at the industry sector. Renewable also, although you are on track, we still think that you can still continue to achieve the 2030 targets. And where we have not so good news is in the sector regarding circular economy, where here Latvia is really lagging behind. There is very poor performance here. We have a huge problem in terms of treatment of municipal waste, and Latvia has even received an early warning from the European Commission as the targets in terms of recycling will not be met, and the landfilling also targets will not be met. Just to give you an idea, you are at 25% recycling, where the target should be in 2020 around 50%. And then you are, in terms of landfilling, you are at 64%, where the target in 2030 should be around 10%. So here, as I said, in some member states, under the current programming period, we have been able to go very far. I'm afraid that in the case of Latvia, this we will have still to manage in the future programming period. And the same for the water management. We also thought that this could be already solved and implemented under the current programming period, but we still think that maybe there will still be needs to carry over for the next programming period, at least in some rural areas. Concerning the transport sector, I think also we discussed this morning, well, has been, and Muriel, you also highlighted some achievements, but of course the challenge was big, and this, there will be also need for investment in the transport, in the road 10T corridor, mainly to adapt to the growing traffic intensity of the Via Baltica, but also to increase the safety standards. We note that in Latvia there has been a remarkable improvement in terms of accidents in the roads, but still the fatality rate remains very, very, very high, and much higher than the EU average. So here this will be also clearly a priority. And then, of course, the 10T rail core network will need also to be completed. And another important indicator for us is that only 14% of the railway lines are electrified in Latvia. So, well, hopefully this also will change under still the current programming period achievements, but still this indicator remains very low, and together with, of course, the connectivity gaps and the peripheral and the border regions difficulties. The last challenge in this part of the presentation is about the territorial disparities. We had this question already this morning. And it's a cross-cutting challenge who has to be seen in the whole intervention. We have seen that Latvia has done a remarkable convergence process over the last 15 years and getting to 64% EU average. But we have to see that the benefits of this convergence is not being the same in all regions of Latvia. And the benefits have not been felt across all the regions. The main benefits, and it's not a secret, they are concentrated in Riga, where Riga is 107% EU average. Well, we have Latgale region and Sengale region that I think were mentioned also this morning, with figures of 36% and 38%, which are really one of the lowest of the European Union. So here, also, the importance of this is that these are the same disparities as you have them 15 years ago. So the good news, I will say, is that the internal disparities in Latvia have not increased because, well, I have to say that in other member states, internal disparities have even increased despite a huge convergence process. but in the case of Latvia, they were already huge, and they have not been, we have not been able to decrease these disparities. These disparities are not only in terms of income, but they are also in terms of productivity, and we see them also in terms of unemployment, where you have unemployment rate in Riga of 4% and 15% unemployment rate in Latgale. And then I think also one of the elements that we would like to discuss with you is that we see that these disparities are very much correlated also with the demographic trends and with the population. And I think this is something that we would like also to discuss and put on the table, where we were mentioning the demographical challenges in the country as such, but I noted that in some of the regions we have even 10% reduction on the population, which is then quite alarming. And then this also is together with the urban and rural divide that we will also have to discuss. Concerning the social agenda, I'm going to run very, very quick because Muriel already had highlighted this morning the four main elements which are driving us the architecture of policy objective 4 is the working age population, which is shrinking, the difficulties on the education and the training system in terms of consolidation of the resources, but in terms of quality and efficiency, the fact that this education system is not sufficiently responsible to the labor market needs, and the skill shortages are increasing, and then the need for increasing the participation of active labor market policies, vocational training, and adult learning. We also have discussed extensively this morning that despite some improvements on the social safety net in Latvia, they remain still ineffective, and they are not able to reduce the high inequality, poverty, and social inclusion, and the situation of the elderly, unemployed, and persons with discapacities continues to deteriorate. And then, of course, the last one is, and that we discuss also sufficiently, is the health outcomes, which are very weak, the structural reforms which are ongoing, they are just initiated, they need to move forward, and we need to face the health workforce shortages, and we have to ensure the good access for good quality and affordable health care, including the long-term care services. So this is, in a nutshell, a kind of extract, if I can say it, of the challenges that you and we discussed this morning in the country report, but that we think they are going to be tackled through the Commission priorities for the cohesion policy. So here it is. The first priority for Latvia is proposed is to support and to ensure the innovative and smart industrial transformation of Latvian economy with four main objectives. One will be to increase the research and innovation capacity, to improve research, development, and innovation system, everything related to the innovation ecosystem, connecting all the relevant stakeholders, supply and demand, research institutions, business, academia, and NGOs. The aim of this is to move up on more added value economy, more innovative firms, and sectors with highest potential, highest value added, and this, of course, within the remits of the smart specialization strategies. Strengthening the supply side of the research institutions and supporting collaborative research between universities and business, not only in Latvia, but also together with your neighboring countries or whatever international countries in order to enable technological transfer and commercialization of the research outcome. The second objective is about growth and competitiveness on SMEs. We still consider that the main engine of the Latvian economy are the SMEs, and we propose a strong support to the internalization of the SMEs initiatives, their integration, as I said, and moving up in the global value chains, not only in the domestic value chain, but in the international value chains, To identify new exports, I think this morning also there was the reference to the export, the lack of the lack of capacity to export. So to identify these new export markets with cooperation networks, with interregional clustering, and including also the coordination with the Baltic states. And finally, promoting entrepreneurship, the creation of new firms, and everything related to the startup, scale-up, and accelerator. The third objective under these policy objectives will be to bring the benefits of digitalization. As we said, you have done a remarkable progress in digitalization, but now it's in terms of coverage, but now it's about bringing these benefits to the citizens, to the companies, and to the government, increasing also the use of e-services and increasing the ICT uptake in SMEs. And the fourth element, which is new for this new programming period, is the possibility for the ERDF also to finance some skills, some skill agenda, so development of the new skills in the smart specialization areas. So in order to be able to accompany this transformation process in these smart specialization growth areas, the ERDF can also finance the capacity and the skills to manage these smart specialization strategies in the public sector, in the research community, but also in the business sector. Moving to policy objective 2, as I said, Latvia is doing quite well on energy efficiency, but we will still like to move it forward because it remains quite energy intensive. And here our proposed investment will be, and we said that the best energy is the one, the best energy efficiency is the one you don't use. So this is where we would like to intervene in energy efficiency activities in public buildings and in renovating of multi-apartment buildings. You are already doing under this programming period, but to extend this more broadly, and also to improve energy efficiency in SMEs. The second objective under this policy objective will be, specific objectives will be to ensure finally the transition from Latvia to the circular economy and waste prevention. As I said, you are struggling on this topic under this current programming period, and the idea will be to go to a modern waste management, so not to move from the traditional, if I may say, waste management system to the more modern waste management system, going up in the ladder of the waste hierarchy, moving to waste prevention, reuse, recycling, separate collection system, composting, and with important awareness campaigns. And here we see that there could be also an important sector where could be important energies between this policy objective and policy objective 1 in terms of technological upgrade and eco-innovation. I think this could be one of the areas where the tandem between the two policy objectives could work. The third objective is the climate change adaptation. Here, I think my key words will be cooperation with across borders in the Baltic Sea area. And the fourth is, as I said, there are still some remaining water management projects that we will have to be continue doing in order to ensure full compliance across in Latvia. Moving to policy objective 3, more connected Europe. Indeed, I think we have, as I mentioned, there are several challenges in terms of network coverage, in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of safety, and in terms of regional accessibility that we would like to address. First, by completing the trans-European transport core networks, but meeting also the EU standards for the national roads, and by also having a positive impact on the regional development and on the cross-border mobility. Tackling also, as I said, some road safety, energy efficiency, and environmental issues, including the reduction of the energy consumption and the introduction of the renewable energies also in the transport sector. We discussed the concentration of population which mainly goes now to cities and surrounding areas. So this is also putting a lot of pressure on the urban mobility. So our proposal will be also to promote sustainable and efficient urban transport system, always as part of the integrated territorial development strategies. And finally, coming to the digital connectivity, we will still like also to propose to still close the gap in some rural areas in terms of coverage, and then to finance the deployment of very high capacity networks in order to enable access to the main socioeconomic drivers. So, yeah.
So I have the unfortunate role, I have the feeling that I'm like the rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. I am late. So policy objective 4 on a more social Europe, I can swear to you that I had very interesting things to tell you. And I will then trust you that you can read and that the slides and that I will be ready for answers during the Q&A thing. I think we covered quite a lot of challenges again this morning, and that there will be no surprise in any case what I would have liked to give more details and a few examples. So trust me, but now Normunds, you can speak about policy objective 5.
Thank you, Muriel. This is really incredible. But it's nothing bad about to be a little bit late, you know. It's good because it means we have a lot of things to say, hopefully also meaningful and important things to say, which is the case, of course. So I will try to finish our presentation in a very short way, which I'm not really good at, so be patient a little bit. But I think what you heard from Angela and Muriel and from me, you've got a lot of messages, right? And I think you understood more or less where we are in terms of Commission proposing to Latvia to structure the future program. But what you heard so far is what you heard before, also, with some novelties and touches here and there, because PO1 to PO4 is basically also reflects on our current thematic objectives. Well, I am happy to present you the PO5, which is a brand new policy objective, which never existed before. I mean, not in this period, not in 2000, 2006. And it's called Europe Closer to Citizens in a very unpretentious way. But it's a territorial place-based policy objective. And we had big debates inside the DG and the Commission whether really it's worth to have a policy objective or rather stay at the implementation level, at the tools level, because we currently have territorial tools, integrated territorial investments, ITIs and CLLDs, which we can implement through the programs, but they don't have to be a policy objective. I'm very glad that we have a policy objective, which is territorial and place-based policy objective. Why? It doesn't exclude us from thematic concentration. We have to go ahead with innovation, with the energy efficiency, whatever. You found that at PO1 and PO2, 65%. We will insist on that. There is a social fund which needs have a large part of our funding, but we will have also a margin. And even if the funding is slightly lower than maybe we all would hope for, we have first time the possibility to look at what happens in the country in terms of territorial reform, in terms of cooperation, in terms of how cities work with the surrounding areas, whether there is a cooperation going beyond administrative borders in creating functional territories, which is the key term under PO5, and whether we can also look more at local initiatives such as based on the CLLD type of investment, which makes sense and which really is good for local development. And I say it really seriously, we need help from Latvia, and I know that there is still an ongoing discussion on future territorial reform. Please do it quickly and do it sensibly so that we can actually come in the next period and support the creation of these functional territories and cooperation between different territories, be it the big city with a surrounding area, be it 3 small cities with surrounding areas, be it, rural, urban, because there is a gap between different territories also in Latvia. It's a small country, I know it very well, but there's a huge gap. And we are not saying you should create Silicon Valleys all around the country and build centers of innovation, everything. No, you have to come up with something which makes sense, where everybody has, of course, the development potential, everybody has a strategy, but it's based on functionality principle. And the cooperation is a key word for that, because you have to ensure that, really cooperation goes beyond administrative borders, that also issues such as access to services, the mobility issue of people is part of this strategy, of this development strategy, and then we are ready to, I think, seriously also put some substance and some investment under policy objective 5, which is a new one. It's not just about that, it's also about helping to build the capacity of different levels of governance. As we talk now, it's about local authorities, urban authorities being able also to work not just with us on our project, but generally to be able to be competitive in preparing project pipeline, whatever, having the administrative capacity in place. But as I said, it's not just about assistance to local authorities. This is really where we need to work with you on filling in the substance in the policy objective 5, something that corresponds to your territorial reform, but something that is based on cooperation and functionality, not on administrative borders, and wish to have every school in every village everywhere. I'm sorry to be so blunt. That's not about that. This is about creating really cooperation. And that is very important, because in the end it's about sustainable growth, right? And we know that the funds cannot fund the maintenance. So whatever we create from the funds, whatever we support, needs then afterwards to be sustained, funded, and from whatever is local budget or national budget. So there we have to be really careful, and we have to put this sustainable integrated strategy as the basis for our investment. We don't have key enabling conditions under PO5, but we do, because we will not support something which is standalone investment in whichever area. This is about supporting investment, which is part of development strategy. So I hope I'm very clear about this policy objective 5. I will not go more into details, because this is something where we really will be listening also to Latvian authorities, the way they see filling in this PO5. I just want to say that we will also, after this meeting, and now we are launching officially the dialogue. There's no negotiations. It's not allowed by legal terminology. I cannot negotiate with member state. We can only have dialogue. So that is a good thing, I think. So we are launching this dialogue on the new programming period in Latvia. We will send you a letter where we'll be asking your authorities to produce your own action plan, the way you see when the program can be adopted, when can we have talks, how can we set the timing in place. So it's up to you to decide. The partnership and dialogue with all stakeholders is part of this action plan. Absolutely, and today is only the beginning, but we hope also that starting today will allow us to accept the program for Latvia, and hopefully also the partnership agreement, or whatever you call it. There are some aggregated data which we need, be it at the program or partnership agreement level, but we need that, and this hopefully can be adopted then extremely shortly after the adoption of MFF and our regulatory proposals. So thank you, and now I really wish you a very good day, and I hope for very efficient and constructive dialogue with all of you for the next years to come. I finish here. Not so much behind schedule.
Tā kā dialogu ir nepieciešams.
Since at least 2 parties are necessary for a dialogue, I would like to give the floor to Boris Knygins, who is going to provide his view of what is necessary for the Latvian investments. Thank you. It is a very bold statement to claim that I am able to provide you with a clear view. But I would like to give you an insight into what our position is. First of all, we would like to thank the European Commission for the report and for the input. This is very important to identify our national processes, and we know that the national plan will be the basis for everything. So it is too early to provide position of the Ministry of Finance, because before that we need the government, the state level vision or standpoint of what is what and where we are. So this is the first slide of my presentation, which I want to show you in order to outline that for almost that our vision, our view and standpoint coincides in about 99%. We have been cooperating for more than 10 years already, so we are quite well aware of what we think about in terms of development and investments. The only difference that you can see here is that the social block consists of two boxes, whereas the EC sees it in terms of 5 objectives. We will have to work on this, and we will have to understand the details and the physical, parts that we will be working on. This is to show you, we are the Ministry of Finance, so we want to have order in our figures. You can see that the Commission presentation says it's 4.7. However, the effect is related to economic terminology. These are the actual prices and so on. What I wanted to outline here is that the figure here in the activity program is 4.4 billion. The figure that will be entered for the next period will be 3.8 billion. So this is the key message that we want to give you. Please look at the actual figures that will be available for the implementation of the National Development Plan. So it will be slightly smaller. In essence, my presentation is not to finger point and say that, oh, we can't find something or we don't see something. But instead, I want to say that we have common work, joint work lying ahead of us. So the Commission has completed its part of the homework, and we have now our homework to do, and we have also the third pillar lying ahead of us, which is the reconciliation. So we will see which questions we will need to find answers to. This is the question of the total amount, the sum. How do we meet such a wide range of challenges with smaller funds? We need to find larger. If we have higher co-financing, then we will need to find the co-financing on our part and from our budget. So we will need to add, obviously, more from our side. And the third thing that may have an impact as a result is our opportunity to develop, and it is subject to the application of VAT. But currently this is being discussed in the Council, and we are going to launch trialogues with the Parliament, and Parliament proposals are already available. So we have a large discussion lying ahead of us, and we hope that this discussion will be finished as soon as possible, because before the legislative framework is confirmed or approved, we can't finish it. But we will use the opportunity to communicate and to shape the dialogue with the Commission in order to be ready to the best extent, or to the utmost extent possible. Also, the concentration. Nationally, this is a great concern of ours. Again, this is a matter that we will have to find an answer too, because the challenges are there. We understand that we have to tackle the solutions, we have to tackle the challenges and find the solutions, but generally we have to understand that we are already investing 35% in innovation, whereas if we look at a greener Europe, then we see that our investment is already 13%. Thus, this is not just a challenge to plan this investment, but also it will be a challenge to assess the capacity with which we can implement these investments or absorb this investment. This is our, in other words, our absorption capacity. Well, the question is whether we will be indeed able to achieve everything we want to. We have 7 years, and we have to realize that we will never be able to solve all of the problems within 7 years. Another matter, that this is something that we will have to find a solution for, is we are going to work when we will have detailed discussions on the national plan. So the question will be how, with our national plan, respond to the Commission's requirement and the challenges brought forward, and also fit in the concentration areas. So here you can see that we concentrate 65% on the first two. So the question is, how do we distribute most efficiently equally important challenges in the three other objectives? I would like to apologize for this title, which it's not about something not being included, but it is about how we plan our funds efficiently considering the requirements, which, as already the colleagues from the Commission mentioned, go through all of the challenges. We, for example, we are missing people. The amount of inhabitants is decreasing. And now, as for the territorial matter, in PO5, we see that being a very efficient tool. We see the value added, but we still within the Council are discussing. So how if we focus on the solutions related to greener Europe and smarter solutions, then we think that cities still do need to be part of the concentration. And then we will clearly be able to respond to the question of how do we eliminate disparity within Europe more efficiently.
And the Ministry of the Economy already raised in the morning session one of the issues when it comes to productivity constraints. This is about the large enterprises as well. I mean, their productivity should be the focus. It's not so much linked to different challenges that were raised. It's more linked to the fact that NDP must be consistent in its approach to the businesses of all sizes, and then we can, see what exactly should we support through the cohesion policy or cohesion funding. Another issue of concern, which is discussed currently with the Council, is the regeneration of waste or use of waste to generate energy. Most probably we were too slow in the previous periods investing money into appropriate facilities. Most of Europe did that. We were hesitant about it, but now we see that when it comes to waste management efficiency, we know that we can partly reach our targets by using the waste to generate power. We just need to have appropriate facilities, and we must also be able to prove that it will boost the efficiency, that we'll be able to reach those targets that had been set for our country. But we think, nevertheless, that this should be a part of the analysis underpinning the National Development Plan, or considerations underpinning the National Development Plan. And also culture, which is a very important part of our country, which is very important for our nation. Considering previous investments into the culture sector, their efficiency and lack of efficiency probably is something that we need. It needs to be reflected in the National Development Plan. And in order to successfully tackle or agree on these issues and challenges, we have prepared our own vision or timeline, if you will. And we're on the same page with the Commission when it comes to the target or the outcome of 2021. So in 2021, basically, the money should land. And there are 3 pillars: the national process, the regulation, and then the dialogue with the Commission. All of these phases have to be completed in the next 18 months, and we need to be well organized, and then the discussion must be smooth. And as has been mentioned, we're not about to enter this dialogue. The dialogues are already happening, and we will step up the exchanges with the Commission, but we are also trying to make the best of the phase that we're in currently to identify what the Commission, in fact, proposes through its Annex D. And we are looking forward to the Commission letter, which would invite us to prepare the roadmap. We've already started charting the roadmap, and this roadmap will definitely be linked to the NDP. And we will try to make sure that we complete our homework together with the submission of the initial draft of the OP. So that means that we'll have an NDP that will enable us to launch the investment projects in 2021. And there's going to be no interruption, no delay, no lag when it comes to investment. Also, considering that the EC proposals are based on the draft regulation proposed by the European Commission, most probably from a technical point of view, we'll have to at one point align our positions to the requirements of the regulation, proposed regulation, just to ensure that we have completed all the advanced preparation for the introduction of the regulation. And we would also expect the Commission to give us some leeway and approve some of the key decisions before the regulation, so that we could start operating or start building on those decisions before the adoption of the regulation. So I'd mentioned repeatedly that we'd been in close contact. We'd been explained how to understand the proposals, or how to take in the proposals of the Annex D, and how to integrate these proposals, or rather, how to create the roadmap. And then as soon as we'll have the first draft of the National Development Plan, we'll be able to talk about the cohesion funding framework for the next programming period. That's all from me. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Boris. And now the floor is open for questions. So all of the questions that you have kept to yourself, all the questions that had been eating away at you and that you have been anxious to ask, today's the day, this is the time. Now you can take the mic and ask those questions. While you're thinking about the questions, I'd like to start by asking a question to colleagues from Brussels, and if I may, I'd like to ask it in English.
These 5 areas for Latvia, which have been identified and then going into the detail, it seems like it is a presentation which seems as a good idea where to invest EU taxpayers' money in Latvia. How much do you see that these areas of investing EU taxpayers' money, how much you expect that Latvian taxpayers' money are invested in the same areas?
Well, as Boris said, there is a co-financing requirement, so it would be almost 50-50. And, you know, in fact, it's difficult to calculate because Latvian taxpayers do contribute to EU taxpayers' money. And, but seriously speaking, these are the priorities which really comes from the really intensive and deep analysis of the Commission, where we really see that we can target investment in Latvia. And obviously, like everybody else said, it's true we are proposing much higher co-financing rate from national budget. Why? Because we always talk about the ownership, we always talk about the dependence on the EU funding and how to avoid it, about additionality. It's all very important because full reliance in public investment on the EU budget is something that is not sustainable, and we all know that. And in Latvia, it's a very high percentage of public investment. So obviously, when we talk about co-financing, we talk about the rate. But we can also say that it's possible to target this rate within the program. It is a general co-financing rate, but you can fluctuate the rate if you find, for example, within the priority axis, that there are some parts of investment where it's problematic to attract co-financing. You can increase the co-financing rate and then use a lower co-financing rate in other parts. So there is a flexibility inbuilt also vis-à-vis co-financing rate. What is very important, what I hear about the National Development Plan, and I think it's probably very good that Latvia has a new government and you are working on a National Development Plan, because all what we presented today can very constructively feed into the development of this plan, because the most awkward thing would be if the Latvian National Development Plan would go completely some other direction, because then it would be difficult to understand what kind of analysis it is based on, because I think we all aim at some sort of objective, sound analysis, which then also defines priorities for investment. Of course, the EU cannot fund everything. As I said, it's a very small part, very important part we can fund, so it has to go hand in hand also with forecasts for national budget, the way that the maintenance, the performance, the daily business will be funded in Latvia, but also in terms of reforms, because it's obviously up to national authorities to continue finalizing reforms. As I mentioned territorial, I mentioned health, I mentioned education, which is very important, and also in my public interviews I mentioned tax reform and labor market reform. And it's true that Latvia suffers from, you know, the labor market problems, in the sense that people are still, you know, we're still losing people. But this is why we have to make Latvia an attractive place. And this is why we have to keep also addressing social inclusion part, because I think, you know, the sound social system and this social inclusiveness is what also adds to the society being attractive. It's of course the opportunities for jobs and growth, but it is also the social part, and this is why it's also stressed in our presentations. We can talk for hours, but I think it's best that we hear some of your questions. But it's true that our intention is to work very hard together with authorities in Latvia. and hoping that you will also take on board what we propose today, and then I think as a basic starting point, we are ready to develop further, and of course we will adjust. If you convince somebody in the council to go for different co-financing, great, what can I say? We'll take that on board, or if you convince other member states to fund VAT, it's your job, okay? Not ours.
Jā, lūdzu, jautājumi? Jā, lūdzu.
And now we open the floor for questions. I am from the State Chancellery, and I was happy. And I quite enjoyed the morning session. My name is Haralds Beitels, by the way. And I like that you talk so much about social issues, human capital, and how this all ties in with the investment, innovation, and so on and so forth in the next programming period. And I hope that these principles will also apply to the public administration, to the government, which is the biggest employer in our country. Roughly 60,000 people or civil servants are employed by the government. And we hope that in the forthcoming programming period, State Chancellery will be as successfully implementing various capacity-building projects aimed also at the top-level managers or top-level officials. And top-level officials are being trained in scope these efforts, and various networking events are being held. And my question is as follows. Why did the Commission decide or why did it suggest, when it comes to upskilling and the training of the public administration, to bring it to, or sort of focus decentralization? Because, experience shows that decentralized model is not probably the most efficient, especially when you have shortage of or scarcity of resources, because if you develop various sectors and if you neglect other sectors, then you might have something like two-speed Europe, and you might have a sort of a two-speed government, if you will. So the question is, what underpins your proposal? And another question is also linked with this. Could you give me any examples of the benefits of decentralized governance? And how are you going to sort of provide decentralized upskilling and training of government officials? Would those be individual ministerial projects? Or would there be a comprehensive sort of umbrella program for the whole country?
Paldies. Vēl vienu jautājumu, jā?
Thank you. We'll take one more question. Nata, please, from the Audit Authority. I'm the head of the Audit Authority, or auditing body, rather. Well, I saw some interesting figures in the EC presentation. I totally agree that in order to tackle the social exclusion, we need to invest more. But 70,000 unemployed have benefited is something that you mentioned, and you also mentioned that 660 new jobs have been created. But what about the remaining 79 plus something thousand unemployed that haven't got the job in scope of these 660? Have you analyzed that? And have you sort of estimated the IRR on those unemployed, the investment return rates on those unemployed? Because they are not willing to go into retraining as well, because there's very little demand for the retraining. And how, what are the other ways to solve these social issues? Thank you. Well, if I may, I'd like to start by answering your question. This is something that I, heard in Lithuania as well. The same misconception. People thought that we are saying that we need to invest social fund financing of monies. Yes, ESF is good in terms of solving various problems, but when we're talking about social inclusion, when we're talking about various social issues, we are talking about a broader range of issues. This is not only the retraining of unemployed, and in Lithuania, I suggest everyone should read any, biochemistry textbook, because biochemistry is a subject which shows very clearly the ties and the bonds and links between the living organisms in the human body. And in order to have sustainable development, you can of course invest in innovation just without thinking, give all the money to the innovation. But if we don't invest in a socially responsible manner in the innovation, and if we don't measure the returns of those programs or the effect of those programs, especially on vulnerable groups of society, we will not have a full picture. When it comes to solving various social issues, I think that we should use the monies available from all the European structural funds and cohesion funding. This is not about particular or ESF, for example. And what I'm saying is that we shouldn't be focusing only on retraining of the unemployed. We of course shouldn't forget about unemployed, but we should also focus on other issues like energy efficiency, clean energy or green energy, how that will affect social, how to make sure that it's socially inclusive sort of development or growth, because it's one of the underpinning principles, and it is often beneficial. And this is not so much about, giving a special role to the government. Yes, there are, of course, different authorities and bodies that play a very important role in terms of absorbing the funds and clear directions from the government, and the government instructions, of course, is important, but we should follow the regulations as well, because otherwise it will be infringement, irregularity, and we will have to be punished for that, and we need to have qualified people to work with the funds and the distribution. And as regards to the capacity and capability of the ministries to deal with these issues, that is more of our sort of own problem. I hope that this money will not be lost to the capacity building, internal capacity building, because that's not the objective of the funds or the funding. But colleagues from the ESF may all correct me on this, but I think that during this programming period we have had a separate priority or activity, which was the government capacity building, and we also have the structural reform support service program or scheme, which is a new service and which will in future support these kinds of measures. When I was talking about administrative capacity, I meant, local level, city level administrative capacities that are directly, linked to the absorption of funds, to make sure that, there is compliance assured in scope of the absorption. And that's more of a national initiative, but we're always ready to support good ideas and give you, good advice or counsel you, because they specifically will fund small-scale projects that are aimed at boosting, the capacity, government capacity in particular. That's my answer to these questions, but my colleagues can continue if they will.
Yes, I just wanted to complement the question on the State Chancellery, on the support of the administrative capacity and the institutional capacity. As I said in my presentation, we will not be able to solve everything with the cohesion policy. And this is why we run all the challenges, and then we have to a bit distribute the different challenges among the different financing instruments. And in the multi-framework proposal by the Commission, there is also a proposal to reinforce considerably the reform support program in order to support the structural reforms. And also this has two legs. Well, they have more legs, but there are mainly two legs. One is the reform delivery tool, but there is also a huge package in terms of technical assistance support. And I think this is already, you are already using that. So it's not new, and this, in fact, what the MFF is proposing is to extend it and even to reinforce this technical support. You will have the reform delivery tool, which will be based on voluntary basis, based on results-oriented of what the reforms you want to achieve, but then there will be a strand as well on pure technical assistance, technical support. And this is meant to cover your general administration capacity. And then where we come to the cohesion policy, when we come to the cohesion policy, this is where we said, okay, we are also be able to finance administrative capacity, but administrative capacity which is dedicated to support mainly the main beneficiaries and the main actors of the implementation of the cohesion policy. So this is how we more or less foresee the split and the division of labor between the general institutional capacity of the general administration and the general structural reforms, and then when it comes to the administrative capacity reinforcement for the implementation of the cohesion policy in Latvia, then it can be financed. The only difference from the current programming period is that this was done under a separate, different objectives. And now what we are not changing anything. What we are proposing that instead of being under one separate objective, that this is now embedded in each policy objective. So when you are doing innovation, when you are doing climate change, when you are doing transport, the necessary administrative capacity support and technical assistance which is relevant for that ministry, for that beneficiaries, for the preparation of projects, it can be, it can be institutions, could be also pure technical assistance. This will be then embedded in each individual policy objective. Where we are also proposing is this time is a more flexible approach to technical assistance, where we are only also proposing to work on technical assistance based on real cost, on simplified cost, but also we are ready to move also to work on basis of results and not on basis of cost. So I think there are an important number of instruments in terms of administrative capacity, going even further as it was before, but maybe in terms of structure and the way we are presenting it is in a different manner.
Yes, maybe to complement the question of the representative of the auditor authority on long-term and unemployed, of course the ESF intervention, it's always on the basis of projects and some target groups so the target group is a target group, you don't target the whole population. But I think it's important to also then go back to the analysis that we do in the country report on this, because we acknowledge that the coverage and the spending also on active labor market policy is low, and that it creates some limitation, of course, on the activation of those most further away from the labor market. However, we saw during the morning that there were some improvements in the figures for long-term unemployed. So this is really already something that is interesting. And it's the result of course, some ESF things, but also some structural reforms, labor market policies as such. But if you go to our analysis, you will see that we give some hints to where there are some gaps in the design of the policy. There is a need for better coordination, cooperation between public employment services. There are some problems of access, definitely, for those the most disadvantaged workers in rural areas. There is a series of findings in the report that can help to make better use of the ESIF funds now, but also in the future. So, of course, it cannot be seen in isolation, as you were saying, Normans.
Tā kā mēs strauji tuvojamies pasākumu nobeigumam.
We are rapidly approaching the end of this event, but we have room for one question. Diana Ragana from Ministry of Economics. First of all, I would like to thank the European Commission on behalf of everyone for this overview, and I would like to congratulate with the fact that you were able to formulate this in a relatively simple language. I would like to say that we completely subscribe to these principles of continuity and simplification, and I hope that on the basis of our experience, we will be more efficient at implementing these investments. In order to ensure continuity, I have seen or witnessed two programming periods where we have failed to succeed, but I hope that this time we will succeed because we have the key fundaments. Therefore, I had three questions, and the EC responded to one of them. If we have the existing management and control system, and if it doesn't require accreditation, then it certainly simplifies the subsequent processes. And what I heard is that the objective view of the European Commission is that the management control system with this single agency centralized approach works. We also think the same way, and we are happy, and we could carry on this way. I have two other questions, very short ones. They are important from the initiation of investment planning, also throughout the entire cycle. In other words, this efficient partnership that the EC emphasizes. I did not hear the objective view of the Commission with regard to how well we are doing here. We have done everything possible in this programming period to engage partners in the social forums and in cooperation forums, both in formal and informal events. What is the European Commission's objective opinion based on other countries' experience of what Latvia could do better and how it could do better? And the third final question could be also related to this continuity to have the investments already made in 2021 where Latvia wants them to be. We know that the state support regulation is there until the end of 2020, with the opportunity to introduce amendments by 2022. What is the Commission's internal information or view with regard to this continuity of state support regulation, if it's possible for you to respond? Thank you once again to the representatives of the European Commission for your daily operative rapid response and support, because otherwise we would not be able to introduce investments as efficiently in Latvia as we would want to. Finally, with regard to the Latvia's performance in terms of the data of 2017, I would like to hope that we will be able to take pride in our performance in 2018, because we have done our utmost best in the area of investments.
Can you hear me? No? Yes? No? No. Is it okay? Okay. As regards to continue and the governance or, well, administrative reform which was implemented during this programming period is an example that I give to other countries as well, because we have reduced the number of intermediary bodies, And quite often, indeed, when it comes to sub-management, sort of management level, where you have a lot of intermediary bodies that you need quite often, but that increases administrative sort of burden and procedures a bit longer. So the question is how to integrate the various administrative levels into management and information system, and that has been discussed with the management committee that consists of management commission, which has a lot of representatives of ministry. And in Latvia, media are following processes so closely that you can't avoid but be fully transparent. And we often listen to what the NGOs have to say, NGOs representing or speaking on behalf of various social groups, and to what extent those opinions are taken into account. Well, they are, and when we work on new OPs, where we not only listen or follow our own considerations and arguments, we also listen to the different stakeholders. We have to have the communication going both directions, and we very much appreciate the opinions given to us, and we try to integrate them in our proposals, and we very much appreciate the dialogue we have with Latvia. Of course, there's again always room for improvement, but we hope that it will be smooth sailing in future as well. Usually, everyone is very active in the initial phases, and then sort of the energy or enthusiasm dies down. But NGOs should be closely involved and very active. And Angela can, for example, confirm. She's been to the monitoring committee meetings in the recent years. I hadn't been, so I can't really talk about the engagement and the involvement of different stakeholders. But there are, countries in Europe where the situation is much worse when it comes to the involvement or the engagement. What concerns state aid, that is something that Commission constantly focuses on and works with. I don't want to make any predictions, because we always emphasize or underline that, the state aid shouldn't somehow contradict with the EU investment, but I don't want to make any speculations as regards to, this relationship. But I hope that you're happy with my answer.
And I just wanted to complement a bit what you said and the answer to Diana, because also is somehow in the Annex D, somehow also in the Commission priorities. Indeed, I think we recognize the management and control system for Latvia. It has delivered, and we expect that you roll over for the next programming period. The same for the partnership principle, and what we also understood now in your process of describing and defining your national development plan. We also see that you are on track, and you are putting things in order. However, I think there are some elements in Annex D where we would like still to reinforce. And I think this is where we come a bit with the capacity building of some partners, both at the level of the partnership principle, where you have, we would like to reinforce the capacity of the partners to be able to be real partners, and that they are armed and equipped in terms of knowledge and expertise to be part of an active process. And also, for example, in terms of the management and control system, where I think the country report addresses some challenges, is at the level of the local municipalities. And I think I would like to strengthen this as well, especially now in view of your new administrative reform. So I think this is where I would like still to put the accent that I think for us the system is in place, but maybe, and the processes, I think they are in place, but I think maybe we need still to work a lot on capacities for the social and economic partners, but also on the capacities of the municipalities to deliver. Also because I think in this programming period we may need also to move more at the level of the municipality level. We have now this very ambitious policy objective 5 that Normus also described, where it will also rely a lot on the capacity of the municipalities to be able to even to define their development, the integrated development strategies, not even the projects, but even to create and develop their own development strategies. So there I think what we will need to have a clear, open discussion with you is mainly on the capacities, how we empower them, not only at the level of institutions in your national system, but how we empower them also from the expertise and the capacity for them to deliver.
For which we need to understand exactly how the territorial reform in Latvia will look and who will be the actors, which then obviously, as Angela said, we would like to see also in terms of reinforcement of the capacity.
Yes, but please be, very, very short and concise. Well, Normans, I would like to give you a hug, at least about what you said about the PO5 bond. And we are on the same wavelength as you. Indeed, we're on the same page when it comes to regional policy guidelines. And together with Cross-Sectoral Coordination Center, we had been working on this major challenge. I'm not shying away from this major challenge of completing the regional reform and ensuring regional development and getting rid of regional disparities. As I already mentioned, we are very much focused on strengthening the capacity of the municipalities of local government. So it's a work in progress. Well, thank you for giving your comments or your ideas. Now I'd like to thank all the presenters and all of you for being an active part of this dialogue. The dialogue has been launched. Everyone has, their arguments, their ideas. What I would like to wish you is to bring this dialogue to a fruitful completion so that we find common language at the end of the day. Thank you all.